Hello, and welcome back to the Electronic Intifada's live stream for Wednesday, October 2nd. Thank you for tuning in. I'm Nora Barrows-Friedman with my colleagues Ali Abunimah, Jon Elmer, Asa Winstanley, and Tamara Nassar. It's day 362 of Israel's genocide in Gaza, as its war on Lebanon expands and as Lebanon and Iran fight back. Coming up, we'll have a discussion with Roqayah Chamseddine in Beirut about Israel's killing of Syed Hasan Nasrallah and the situation in Lebanon as Israel escalates its bombardment of the country and Hizballah defends it against a possible Israeli invasion. Later on in the program, Jon will take us through the latest from the battles in Gaza and Lebanon, along with Iraqi and Yemeni missile attacks on Israel. We're going to switch up the order of things today. Ali and I will discuss the Iranian missile response last night and its implications. We'll then go to the news and the rest of the program. But first, we have our contributor, Abubaker Abed, with us live from Gaza. Abubaker, welcome back. Are you there?
Hi.
Hi.
Hi, Abubaker. It's nice to see you.
So good to see you.
It's always nice to see you as well. Yes, especially because we're absolutely marking the 1 year of this genocide. So here comes the importance to tell you what is really going on after 1 year of the genocide, and particularly after yesterday's fiery events.
Well, tell us. And we have some more coming up in the news report, but tell us about the attacks over the last week in Gaza. Tell us what you've been watching carefully, and just give us an update on how things are in Gaza right now.
Yes, I mean, I don't know why we're paying the price, although we're not a part of the yesterday's attacks, but yes, overnight attacks have already killed around 100 people across the besieged enclave, particularly in Khan Younis, where more than 4 people have been killed, and numbers are increasing as well. And at the same time, Al-Nusayrat refugee camp, there is a family there called Hizballah, which is a very, very rooted Palestinian family that lost dozens of their family members yesterday. And some of them were working as engineers, teachers as well. So attacks on Al-Nusayrat refugee camp particularly have been very much intensified by the Israeli military, because the quadcopters and Israeli snipers are really approaching the C Street, the western parts of the camp there on the Al-Rashid Street. So anyone getting by there are easily getting killed. And also during the attacks yesterday, some people tried to go back to the north. Unfortunately, anyone tried to approach the Netzarim corridor was killed. So 3 people were reportedly killed from Al-Shadr refugee camp who tried to return to their homes in the north. Particularly in the Balah of the past week particularly, attempt was targeted in the Al-Birka area, and more importantly, Mahmoud Ismail, who's just a high school student, and also a football player for Al-Aqsa club, was killed in that attack, and his family, and all of his family members were also killed. Also, a house was targeted. Fortunately, there were no casualties, and at the same time, attacks continued during the night hours and also at pre-dawn, particularly because we heard about the attack on Al-Aqsa Al-Aqsa Martyrs Hospital. So, talking about the central Gaza and Deir al-Balah, because I'm here at the moment. Attacks on Al-Nusayrat refugee camp are very much intensified. Deir al-Balah has also borne the brunt of these relentless attacks. So casualties are just rising, unfortunately, in terms of all the bombing and Israel's continued genocide.
Abubaker, as this 1 year anniversary comes up, I've spoken to people in Gaza who talk about a kind of terrible new normality where people are in some way adjusting to a completely abnormal situation where dozens of people are still being murdered every day in airstrikes, in which there's no medicine available, food supplies aren't there. Is that possible? Is it possible for people to get used to these conditions?
It is not. It's absolutely not. But one of the main reasons behind all what this is happening, and I can't really deny it, because yes, thousands of people are trying to adjust their norm to a completely abhorrent and abnormal situation, is that it's taken so much time. As I've told you, it is too much in people. People can't really bear any more seconds. Look at these celebrations yesterday. Look what the implications behind these Iranian attacks yesterday at Israel. Look at what it means. It was like every corner of Gaza yesterday, as you probably saw on social media, was erupting. There was eruption. There was a sheer sense of euphoria among people here. Look at what it means for a mother whose fetus was killed. Look at what it means for a child who has lost their entire family. Look at what it means to thousands and thousands of people whose houses were destroyed and reduced to rubble out of no reason. So it meant a lot to these people to celebrate yesterday, because no one was with us, no one stood with us, and we were just left alone. I'm not talking about the humanitarian, the people and the boycotting, etc., because we really value that. But in terms of the real action on the ground, and in terms of the battling, this is what we really wanted, because we cannot really accept the fact and tolerate the fact that we are being killed on a very, very daily basis, as you're saying. So I'm just trying to say that there is some sort of normalization of the situation right now, but at the same time, people have some hope after yesterday's attacks, and people still feel that things will change, and probably this attack will append the equation, and probably push the Israelis to accept the ceasefire proposal very soon from the Qatar, mediated by the Qataris or the US. So this is what people are hoping. But yes, at the same time, as you said, amid the shortages of food, medicine, and everything, and unfortunately, all crossings have been closed. If this is something that you haven't known, all the crossings have been closed until October the 10th. So there is just the flow of goods is plummeting, unfortunately. Prices are also skyrocketing at the same time. More people are being trapped in Deir al-Balah. More people are coming to Deir al-Balah because there are repeatedly some, abrupt and short-timed invasions by the Israeli military. So people don't know where to go. And yes, I've seen personally, hundreds of people are fleeing Al-Nusayrat refugee camp after the Holocaust and the harrowing attacks, repeated attacks of the recent weeks there in the area. So it's utterly devastating. But yes, we hope it will just end after marking probably 1 year.
And Abubaker, it's been 1 year of genocide and horror on that. We never believed that we would see such horrors in our lifetime. And I'm thinking particularly of children who now have been out of school for a whole year, and out of university for a whole year for older students. I saw today a video, I think, by Bisan, the journalist in Gaza, which showed an informal education or informal classroom, I believe, near Khan Yunis. Can you tell us about how children are doing? What type of efforts are there around you, where you see what you can see, to give children any sense of normality or education in this ongoing genocide?
Yes, I mean, probably families do really want to educate their children. But these children, we need to remember that these children are so much traumatized, ostracized, and dehumanized at first. So we can see around me particularly that a lot of people, a lot of the children here, Dr. Ali, which is the biggest source of misery, they don't have time to go to informal schooling or informal, classes in tents or anywhere else, because they are the only ones left in their families. So they have to wait and queue up for long hours to get some liters of water and some food for their families. So hundreds and thousands of children here, particularly in Durban, don't have the time to do so. So they work, and that simply means that children's labor is forced upon children. So these children unfortunately don't have the access, don't have the time to go and learn. But at the same time, there are some other children who are trying to resume education, but they, unfortunately, I'm telling you the truth, I'm not trying to be anyway hopeless, but these children cannot really maintain their mental status because they are simply traumatized. And I saw last time when there was some kind of schooling like here in Durban and some of the tents, an attack happened nearby. So families are afraid. Like if I send my children, if I escort my children to one of the nearby schooling or informal schools in tents or in the tented camps, then what if Israel kills him or them, or what if Israel destroys or bombs this tented camp? So families are so much afraid, and families do want to mentally treat their children. That comes as the first priority, because I've told you before, the children here have just learned the war alphabet. I could see outside that they are just talking about rockets being hitting them, talking about warplanes, waiting for warplanes to hover over them, and all of this kind of stuff. So they just talk about warplanes hovering over them, drones buzzing over their heads, and at the same time rockets hitting them and killing their families. This is the story. This is the plot that has been forced upon children here in Gaza. So when it comes, even for me, because I'm a student, there has been some sort of an attempt at resuming education online. But look, I don't have the internet connection. I don't have a good conducive environment to resume my education, which means that this is simply unfeasible for me and for thousands of students. And you said it yourself that people are still being murdered and in mass. So how can we at some point resume this sort of stuff? Because I know that we are trying to do our best, but Israel kills every source of hope. And one last thing before it is that there was someone from a Ramlawi family who married 3 weeks ago, September 9th. 2 days ago, they killed him. Israel killed him. He got married 3 weeks ago. Israel killed him 2 days ago. I mean, look at the barbarity, look at the scale of barbarity and insanity and fascism and Nazism. All of this is inherited in the Israeli regime. So why did they kill him? And by his killing, this marked the full erasure of his family, of a Ramlawi family. He was the last one. And during all these attacks, his family has been wiped out. And this is what we want to tell people particularly.
Finally, Abubaker, the season is changing, and there are, so many, thousands and thousands of people in these tent encampments on the beach with no infrastructure. They've gone through an entire summer in Gaza with scorching heat, and now the rains are coming. What are the conditions for people in these tent encampments or in shelters, wherever they can find any sort of refuge? What are people talking about in terms of preparing for the winter?
They are talking about simply, this is a very good question, Nora. Thank you so much for asking it. I mean, they're talking about they don't have anything. The sky is their blanket and the ground is their mattress. They don't have anything else. They don't have covers. They don't have any means of food. They don't have a financial ability to afford to live and to resist to live, because this has been repeated. This is the second word that is coming through during the genocide, throughout the genocide. I mean, as I've told you before, tents are not shelters at all. They don't work for these people. They will just be trapped. They will just be drowning because of the winter, because it rained yesterday. I could hear the screams of people outside, the screams of women, and reminded that clothes are banned from entering the strip. There hasn't been any sort of clothes that has got into the strip, which means that winter clothes are not available for most people. So most people here just say that I just have this t-shirt for the winter. I just have this blanket for the winter. And they're just stripped. They have red clothes, and most people are walk barefoot, especially when it comes to children. These children don't have sandals, don't have boots, don't have anything to do with this upcoming winter. And as I'm reading the weather forecast, there are expectations that this winter on Palestine is going to be quite harsh and quite strong. So I could see last time when the weather was windy, that the tents of people were swept away, and they were absolutely damaged. So even when they wanted, like, look at the prices here, when they want to seek out some, like, 1 meter square or 1 square meter of cover, of nylon, of plastic, anything that they can cover the tent with, it costs them more than $200 just like this. Imagine that people here can't afford to live that. So the living circumstances for them will just be hellish and nightmarish. I hope people can understand, and I can encourage from here, from my position. I want to encourage everyone listening to me. If you have some way to donate to these people and help them with these dire circumstances, please do. There is also, I talked to you about one child here, one infant here who was recently born. But the woman who was just eating and is still eating stale bread. She's a breastfeeding mother now. Right now, she is in a tent. It rained upon her last time out. So, I mean, there are no words to describe the current situation. There are no words to describe the horror and the terror and the suffering people will be going through. So I hope there will be just more a way to sort this out, and I'm very hopeful that things will change for the better, inshallah.
Inshallah. Thank you so much, Abubaker Abed, speaking to us live from the Gaza Strip. Abubaker, as always, please be as safe as you can. And all of us at the Electronic Intifada, all of our audience who's watching and listening, are so grateful for you and the work that you're doing, and your resilience and your strength, and
for keeping us strong throughout this year,
exactly.
Abubaker. You have kept us strong, believe it or not. And that's not a burden you should have to carry, but it's a reality that we feel better when we see you, when we hear you, when we read your articles, and we hope that the next time we see you will be in better circumstances, and that this will finally be over.
Inshallah. And please keep doing your part, keep doing what you are doing, because you give us hope as well. So all just like the very best from here. Thank you so much. Bye all the best.
Thank you. All our love.
Oh gosh, I'm always so glad to see him, and the connection has been very spotty. So it was, just a miracle to get him on. So thanks. So we will go to the news after this next segment, as I said, but it's been another shocking and tumultuous week across the region. Israel has been waging its genocide in Gaza for almost a year, as it intensifies its attacks on Lebanon. On Friday, Israel carried out an apocalyptic bombing attack on Beirut's southern suburb, killing Syed Hasan Nasrallah, the Secretary General of the Lebanese resistance group Hizballah. Many civilians were killed in the massive bombing that destroyed multiple residential buildings in the densely populated neighborhood. We'll be talking more about Nasrallah and events in Lebanon with journalist Roqayah Chamseddine in Beirut later on in the program. But first, we're going to talk about last night's Iranian missile attack on Israel. Iran's Islamic Republican Guard Corps says that on Tuesday night, it fired dozens of ballistic missiles at vital military and security targets in Israel. The IRGC said that the targets included, quote, the centers of conspiracy and planning of assassination of Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh, Hizballah Secretary General Syed Hasan Nasrallah, as well as of the military commanders from Hezbollah and Iran's own Revolutionary Guards. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi said Wednesday that in carrying out the attack, quote, Iran exercised its right to self-defense under Article 51 of the United Nations Charter. U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris condemned the attack as a, quote, reckless and brazen attack, while British Prime Minister Keir Starmer claimed falsely that, quote, the Iranian regime has launched over 200 ballistic missiles at civilian targets in Israel, and asserted that it was, quote, an attempt to harm innocent Israelis. Both U.S. and British military forces were involved in attempts to repel the attack. Ali, you're currently in Amman, Jordan, and you actually witnessed last night's Iranian missile attack on Israel. What happened and what did you see?
Yes, Nora. Well, yesterday afternoon, the United States issued a warning that it had detected that Iran was preparing to launch missiles towards Israel. I heard that news at around 5 in the afternoon. And around 7:30 in the evening, I heard on Al Jazeera that Iran's Fars news agency was reporting that Iran had just launched its missiles. And I immediately went outside, not knowing what to expect. The sky was clear and it looked like nothing was happened. But then at 7:38 p.m., I started to see one or two strange flashes in the sky, as well as aircraft that did not appear on the flight radar app, which you can use to track air traffic. And that indicates that they were almost certainly military aircraft patrolling the sky. But then very quickly, the sky was absolutely filled with dozens of bright spots streaking across the sky very fast. And this is a video of that I filmed myself. And you'll see now, it was sort of already dark. And there you go. It was just this incredible stream of missiles coming across the sky, like a river flowing through the sky directly from east to west. So really from the direction of Iran towards Israel or occupied Palestine. But also there seemed to be missiles coming in smaller clusters as well. So it wasn't just this one stream, and they would head out west over towards Israel and then drop straight down. At first, it all happened in complete silence. And then it seems like at least a minute or more later, there was just this rumble like thunder, which was the sonic boom. And then it seemed to suddenly stop. And we went inside thinking it was over. But then about 5 minutes later, it started all over again. And there was another big river of missiles. We went up on the roof to watch, and everyone was outside on their roofs and balconies cheering. And there's lots of social media showing that people were celebrating all over Jordan, just as they were in Palestine, as Abubaker told us. And it struck me that if this had been during the daytime, we probably would not have seen very much because the sky would have been too bright. And I don't know if there were specific tactical or technical reasons why Iran carried out the attack after dark. But one clear result of that is that millions of people across the region witnessed it with their own eyes. And if that was Iran's intention to make it visible in such a spectacular way, then it was a really brilliant move from a public relations standpoint. I mean, I just can't describe how awesome it was in the true sense of the word.
Hmm. And did you see any missiles being intercepted by, the Iron Dome, for example?
Well, I did see there were clearly attempts at interceptions, or what looked like there could be interceptions with missiles coming up from the opposite direction, from the west towards the east. And I think you can even see one in the video we just showed. It's hard to tell how successful those were since everything was happening at high altitude. But it was very clear that the number of interceptors was tiny compared with the number of incoming missiles. So even if there were some successful interceptions, just the sheer number of incoming missiles looks like it would have saturated any air defense system. And I'm not sure it would have been the Iron Dome, since, as we discussed last week, that is more of a short-range system. But as we also discussed, Israel and the United States have longer-range missile defense systems. But there's no way they could have kept up with this.
Yeah. And right after the Iranian action, U.S. President Biden came out and made some comments. Let's look at what he said.
Words about Iran's missile attack on Israel today. At my direction, the United States military actively supported the defense of Israel, and we're still assessing the impact. But based on what we know now, the attack appears to have been defeated and ineffective. And this is testament to Israeli military capability and U.S. military. It's also a testament to intensive planning between the United States and Israel to anticipate and defend against the brazen attack we expected. Make no mistake, the United States is...
All right, so that's enough of that. Biden called this a brazen attack, and he claimed it was defeated and ineffective. How credible is that statement?
It's not credible at all, because there's plenty of video evidence that a very large number of missiles hit their targets on the ground in Israel. And we'll get to the videos in a minute. But first, a statement released by the Pentagon, the U.S. Defense Department, says, quote, two Arleigh Burke-class destroyers, the USS Cole and USS Bulkeley, both deployed in the Eastern Mediterranean, fired a dozen interceptors at incoming Iranian ballistic missiles as part of defending Israel, end quote. The statement adds, quote, at this time, it is unknown if those interceptors took down any of the missiles, end quote. Now, that's the only specific reference I could find so far to U.S. involvement in the attempted interceptions. And that was also stated by Pentagon Press Secretary General Pat Ryder at a press conference on Tuesday. Ryder said, quote, during the attack, the U.S. military closely coordinated with the Israeli Defense Forces to help defend Israel. U.S. Navy destroyers deployed in the Middle East region supported the defense of Israel by firing approximately a dozen interceptors against the incoming Iranian missiles. And again, he did not refer to any specific other specific U.S. assets firing missiles. So there really appears to have been a rather minimal American effort. Ryder also claimed, quote, initial reports indicate that Israel was able to intercept the majority of incoming missiles, but videos demonstrate that this is absolutely false. I also want to say, before we get to the videos, that it is possible that other U.S. assets were used that were based, for example, in Jordan or other Arab countries. There are large U.S. bases here in Jordan, and that they're just not saying that because of the political unpopularity. Everyone in Jordan was celebrating this, so it just goes against what everyone wants.
Right. All right, well, let's look at some of those videos.
Yeah, so all the videos I'm going to show you are verified, according to Evan Hill, a journalist with the Washington Post's open source investigation unit. And let's start with this one posted by CNN's Jim Sciutto of missile impacts in Tel Aviv.
Oh, God. Okay, guys, we got to get off the roof. These are coming down right next to us here. They're coming down. One just about... We got to go inside.
Yeah, let's run that one more time.
Oh, God. Okay, guys, we got to get off the roof. These are coming down right next to us here. They're coming down. One just about... We got to go inside.
Yeah. And let's look at the next video, which shows a missile hitting the headquarters of Israel's Mossad spying and assassination agency in Gilot. And this is just north of Tel Aviv. And you'll recall that 𝐓𝐿𝐴𝐷 is a site that Hizballah itself had struck a couple of weeks ago. I think that was in retaliation for the assassination of its military leader, Fuad Shukr. I'm not sure if we're having a technical issue, but we will. Oh, here it goes. Yeah, it goes. Let's show that one more time. And this is obviously an Israeli filming it, and he's saying in Hebrew, "Lo me'amin," which means I can't believe it. You know, it's just something people say when they're shocked at the sight they're seeing. So there we go. That was 𝐓𝐿𝐴𝐷. And then the next one shows probably what was the largest single target. And this is Israel's Nevatim air base in the Naqab region in the south of the country. And that's just really, we could even keep that running. I don't know if we can keep it running without the sound, but I just want to note that Nevatim is one of Israel's most important air bases. It is where Israel's state-of-the-art US-supplied F-35 warplanes are based, the same warplanes that were reportedly used in the attack which killed Hasan Nasrallah. It is also where the Joe Biden-Kamala Harris administration has been airlifting huge quantities of bombs and other weapons to Israel over the last year. So Nevatim has played a major part in Israel's genocide in Gaza and its attacks on Lebanon and other countries, including Syria and Yemen. Nevatim is also where Wings of Zion is based. That's Israel's version of Air Force One, which Netanyahu used on his recent trip to the UN in New York. And of course, many people will have seen that photo of Netanyahu ordering the hit on Hasan Nasrallah from the UN headquarters. And we have another video here of the missile striking Nevatim. And you can just see how many there are coming down. And the Israelis who are watching are just like shocked by that. And in that one, I think you can actually see one missile being intercepted fairly close to the ground, while all the others appear to get through. And that interception is a clue that these missiles were likely on target, because Israel is not going to waste limited air defense resources on low-value assets. And in another video of the strike on Nevatim that I'm not going to show, but that I did see and that has been circulated, I counted 24 missiles hitting the ground in the space of 30 seconds. So that gives you a sense of the extraordinary intensity of this attack. There is one more video I want to show of the attack on Nevatim. And it also shows that intensity. But again, you can hear the absolute shock and amazement in the voice of the Israeli witness who is filming. And I think that's significant because, remember, Israelis have lived through, missile barrages from Hamas for many years, and they have never seen anything like this.
נפילות, אחי, נפילות של החיים בנבטים. נפילות בנבטים, אחי. נפילות קשות בנבטים, שומע? וואו, 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 וואו! וואו! הכל נופל לנבטים, אני אומר לך, מתקפה אחת החזקות. אימא'לה, זהו, למקלט.
Yeah, so in every video filmed by Israelis, they're just they've never seen anything like it. And again, so I think that spectacular aspect of doing this at night played a very important psychological role in the attack. And finally, I want to show a video of massive impacts near the 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐿 air base. This is about 36 kilometers south of Tel Aviv. And pay attention in this video how fast these missiles come down. And there don't appear to be any interceptions. And I'm certainly no military expert, but these may well be hypersonic missiles that travel at many, many times the speed of sound. They certainly look different to the ones that hit Nevatim and other sites. So Let's take a look at this video. Yeah, so that's pretty incredible.
Yeah, I mean, so it's clear that Biden's claim that the attack was, quote, defeated is completely belied by visual evidence. But how do we know how much damage these strikes did to Israel's infrastructure of genocide?
Well, Israel is, of course, trying to play down the effectiveness of the Iranian attack. For example, the Israeli newspaper Haaretz makes the following claim, and I quote, "The initial assessment is that Iran launched about 180 ballistic missiles at Israel, most of which were intercepted or landed in open areas," end quote. And clearly from the videos we've just seen, and I only showed a few of the ones that are available, that's just a lie. There are videos of dozens of missiles hitting the ground. But Israel is also under very strict military censorship, and so they're not going to tell us how bad the damage is. They also will not want Iran to know how effective its strike was or to reveal how vulnerable they are. Also, I think it's significant that Israel did have a few hours of warning given by the United States, which would have given them some time to evacuate bases or to try to move valuable assets to the extent that was possible. The Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps says 90% of its missiles hit their targets. I can't tell you how precise that number is, but from the evidence we've seen, it's a lot closer to the truth than what the American and Israeli claims are.
Yeah. Well, since the attack last night, Israelis have been gloating that 0 Israelis were killed and that the only person who was killed was a Palestinian. He was Sameh al-Asali, and he was hit by a large missile fragment in Jericho in the Jordan Valley region of the occupied West Bank. Ali, what does this tell us about the success or failure of the attack?
Yeah, I think it reinforces how successful it was from a number of aspects. Of course, it's absolutely horrible that Sameh al-Asali was killed, and I'm not going to show the video of that, but there is a video from a security camera, and just like the chances of him being in that place at that time must have been tiny. And it's very likely that the fragment that hit him was due to an interception. And if that interception hadn't happened and the missile would have been allowed to proceed and hit a military target, then he wouldn't have been killed. The other thing to say is that these were targeted at the Mossad headquarters and at Israeli military bases. And Israel is not going to tell us if people were killed or injured there. They're just not going to say. But I did notice as well how many pro-Israeli accounts on social media seem to be gloating that no Israelis were killed, at least according to the official story. And that's very telling because it reveals that many Israelis measure military success not by whether or not military objectives have been achieved, but by how many people they kill.
Yeah.
It's clear that Iran's goal was not to kill people, but to show its capabilities on a scale we have never seen before. It wanted to demonstrate that Israel is effectively defenseless against a large-scale missile attack and to restore some measure of deterrence and, of course, to damage Israel's military infrastructure. If Iran had wanted to kill a lot of people, it could have done what Israel does, which is to indiscriminately bomb cities and neighborhoods, but it didn't do that. It fired these missiles at military targets.
Right. So you talked about the decision to carry out the attack at night, but why was it last night that Iran chose to carry out the missile strikes?
I think Iran must have felt it had no choice and that its policy of restraint was only fueling Israeli genocide and aggression. Let's recall that on April the 1st, Israel carried out its brazen bombing of Iran's consulate in Damascus. 2 weeks later, Iran launched an unprecedented drone and missile attack in retaliation, which the United States and Israel claimed to have thwarted, although there are reliable reports that the ballistic missile part of that attack, which was much smaller than last night's attack, that those missiles did get through. Nonetheless, the attack was fairly restrained because Iran wanted to send a signal that it is willing and able to hit Israel directly, but not to escalate things too far. But it seems to have achieved the opposite by signaling that any Iranian response to Israeli aggression would be contained. Then, at the end of July, Israel assassinated Fuad Shukr, a senior commander of Hizballah in Beirut. And then hours later, it murdered Ismail Haniyeh, the leader of Hamas, while he was in Tehran for the inauguration of Iran's new president, Masoud Pezeshkian. As you'll recall, Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, ordered retaliation. This was considered a serious attack in the heart of Iran's capital against a visiting foreign leader during Iran's presidential inauguration. And so he said there has to be a major retaliation, but that did not come, perhaps reinforcing the sense of confidence in Washington and Tel Aviv that Iran was not willing to confront them directly. And then, of course, in September, Israel began its assault on Lebanon with the pager and walkie-talkie attacks, followed by a series of assassinations of senior Hezbollah leaders. And then, of course, on Friday, it carried out the attack that killed Syed Hasan Nasrallah. Israel has also been waging an ongoing bombing campaign against Lebanon, in Syria, murdering hundreds of people in Lebanon with the type of indiscriminate attacks we've seen in Gaza for a whole year. And Israel appeared to be moving towards a ground invasion of Lebanon with the tacit blessing and support of the Biden administration. Netanyahu, you'll remember, called the assassination of Nasrallah Operation New Order. And that's really an expression of the hubris and triumphalism that overtook both the Israeli and Biden administrations, who thought that the tide had turned, that Hezbollah had been destroyed, and that soon Washington and Tel Aviv's hegemony would be restored. So in this context, Iran could simply not sit back anymore and clearly felt that it needed to send a strong, retaliatory and deterrent message. And the triumphalism has already been tamped down as Hezbollah has demonstrated that despite the loss of Nasrallah, it is willing and able to fight, and that Israel will not be able to roll over Lebanon as it had back in 1982 before Hezbollah was founded. And now this attack from Iran will further concentrate minds in Washington and Tel Aviv.
Mm. Well, after the Iranian missile attack last night, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said, quote, "This evening, Iran made a big mistake and it will pay for it. The regime in Tehran does not understand our determination to defend ourselves and to exact a price from our enemies." What options does Israel have?
There are reports in Israeli media, at least there have been reports in recent days, that Western diplomats were warning Iran that if it intervened in Lebanon, Israel could retaliate by attacking strategic sites in Iran, including oil facilities and even nuclear sites. And today, Axios reported that Israel is considering precisely these kinds of attacks in response to Iran's operation last night. And Israel could probably do that. In August, it carried out long-range refueling exercises as a way to signal its ability to carry out an attack on Iran. But Israel does not have the ability to carry out long-range strikes against Iran on a sustained basis, similar to the way it is bombing Gaza and Lebanon or Syria around the clock, which are, of course, much closer. As we've seen with Israeli attacks on Yemen, which is 2,000 kilometers away, these are one-off affairs and mostly symbolic. Of course, Israel could cause some pain to Iran, but it's difficult to see how it could cause long-term damage to a country the size of Iran and at that distance. Israel does also have long-range Jericho-class ballistic missiles, which were developed in cooperation with the white supremacist regime in apartheid South Africa. These are believed to be intended to carry Israel's nuclear weapons, but they can also carry conventional warheads. However, even if Israel wanted to use them to carry out conventional strikes on Iran, Israel probably doesn't have very many of them. According to estimates from the Center for Arms Control and Non-Proliferation, Israel possesses between 24 and 100 of these missiles, with the lower figure being more likely. So Israel's entire long-range missile arsenal is smaller than the number of missiles that Iran used in a single attack last night. As we know, however, Israel is capable of doing anything, no matter how reckless, criminal, and depraved. So we have to expect anything. Israel is not a rational actor. So it may try a military operation, or it may resort to its typical terrorist tactics like assassinations and sabotage. I'm certain that senior Iranian officials will be beefing up their personal security. And whatever Israel does, it will be taking huge risks, because Iran has said very clearly that if Israel attacks, Iran's next retaliation will be much bigger.
Can you talk about that a little more, what Iran is saying, and any specifics that they are, the way that they're trying to deter Israel and stop the genocide in Gaza?
Yes. Iran's military chief of staff, Major General Mohammad Bagheri, said, quote, "We had the capability to attack the regime's economic infrastructure, but we only targeted military bases. If the Zionist regime is not controlled and takes action against Iran, we will target all of its infrastructure." So other Iranian officials have been giving exactly the same message today as well.
Yeah, that's clear. So even more escalation is possible, even likely, because we know Israel's capabilities. How much does what happened next depend on the U.S.?
Well, contrary to what some may think, Washington really is in the driver's seat here. It is clear that the Biden administration supported Israel's assassination of Hasan Nasrallah and its attack on Lebanon, thinking Iran would not respond hard and that Israel would be capable of changing the balance of power in the region decisively in favor of Washington and Tel Aviv. And that's exactly the miscalculation the Americans made when they encouraged and supported Israel to invade Lebanon in 2006. And Israel was instead defeated and humiliated by Hizballah. Also recall that there were estimates that when the US tried to stop Iran's much smaller attack in April, it cost billions of dollars. Last night, the United States would have also spent a lot of resources, while abysmally failing to stop the Iranian missiles getting through. Even those dozen anti-ballistic missile interceptors they fired from those ships probably cost millions of dollars each and take a very long time and are very expensive to replace. And the United States, as we talked about last week, is already very short of air defense assets. And this effective attack was not only a message to Israel, but to the United States as well. If this is what Iran can do to Israel more than 1,000 kilometers away, what can Iran do to US bases, which are much closer in the case that the United States supports Israel in an attack on Iran? I'll just say that the Biden administration has been exceptionally reckless, belligerent, and irrational as well. But if they were behaving rationally, they would halt the escalation and stop the war by forcing Israel to stop its genocide and its aggression.
Thank you so much, Ali. And yeah, I mean, that's all that needs to happen. And yet the recklessness of the U.S. and, working to support whatever belligerence Israel envisions is making us all worried and much less safe, especially the people in the region. And it could end with a phone call, as you always say.
Yeah. But I just have to say that, like, everyone says, and governments in the region always say, especially the ones that are close to the United States, oh, we don't want escalation. We don't want escalation. Iran shouldn't do this. Iran shouldn't do that. But what about Israel constantly escalating? And I think the message Iran got is that restraint doesn't pay, that the more restrained you are, the more aggressive Israel and the United States get. And I think for Iran, one positive aspect of how much restraint it has shown is that it's very clear to most of the world. Of course, I'm not talking about the United States and its European vassals, but to the rest of the world, it's very clear here that Iran has acted very responsibly, very patiently, and only acted in self-defense and justifiably when it had no other choice.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Obviously, this is a developing situation, and we will continue to update as necessary, either here on the live streams or on electronicintifada.net. Ali, thank you so much. Well, coming up, we'll have Roqayah Chamseddine on to discuss Lebanon. And of course, Jon Elmer will bring his resistance report. But first, here's a brief summary of some of the latest developments in Gaza. Israel carried out a series of massacres against Palestinians sheltering in homes, tents, and schools. Journalist Bisan Auda reported on Tuesday that Israel carried out a strike against people in tents in Khan Yunis, killing 11 people. On Monday, more than 30 Palestinians were killed across the Gaza Strip as Israel bombed a home in Nuseirat refugee camp, killing 13, including 7 children. In Gaza City on Monday, Israel targeted the 𝐓𝐡𝐞 school, killing at least 7, according to the Civil Defense Corps. Airstrikes on people in Rafah and Khan Yunis killed at least 9 people. Those strikes followed Israeli attacks on Jabalia refugee camp and the Al-Fahim school on Sunday, killing people sheltering in Beit Lahia. Israel also attacked Deir Balah in central Gaza. Another Palestinian journalist, Wafa al-Udaini, was killed this week in Gaza when Israel bombed her home and killed her along with her husband and 2 young children. This was her last post on Twitter of sand sculptures on a beach in Gaza, quote, sending greetings and peace to Beirut. Last week, the Israelis delivered 88 unidentified and decomposed bodies of Palestinians in a cargo truck. Journalist Hossam Shabat stated, quote, the Palestinian Health Ministry initially declined to accept a truckload containing 88 decomposed bodies, seeking more information. After Israeli occupation forces refused to provide the requested details, the bodies were buried in a mass grave without any identification. In bittersweet news, the surgeon Khaled Al-Ser, who spoke to the Electronic Intifada several times before he was abducted by Israeli forces in March, was released back to Gaza. His cousin reported that Dr. Khaled was tortured and had lost a significant amount of weight during his 7-month detention, but that he is alive. This past week, the Electronic Intifada published I Will Never Forget You by Bashair Mu'ammar, in which the writer recounts the Israeli attack that she survived, but her brother Zakaria, who she describes as her closest companion, and Zakaria's 4-year-old son Ali, did not. Lying in my hospital bed, Bashair writes, I overheard my uncle Tamim, who had accompanied me in the ambulance, asking the doctors if there was anyone else in the house. The confusion was palpable. The doctors had mistakenly written my name on one of the unidentified corpses. They didn't realize the mistake until my uncles Tamim and Yahya arrived. Zakaria and Ali had been so damaged that even in death, they were unrecognizable. The rescuers had found Zakaria cradling Ali, the upper parts of their bodies mangled into one by the force of the explosion. The lower parts, including Zakaria's legs, formed another unidentifiable mass. 3 weeks later, I found myself in a tent in Al-Mawasi with Amir. 4 days after it had killed my brother and nephew, the Israeli military had ordered us to evacuate our town. I kept replaying the memories of Zakaria, of Ali, of the home that had once been our refuge but was now nothing more than a tomb. As I sat there lost in thought, my phone rang. It was my sister, her voice trembling with fear and sorrow. Israel bombed our uncle's home, she said. Tamim, his wife Islam, and their daughters Salam, Mais, and Huda were all dead. Yahya's wife Najat and son Aboud were also gone. The pain, already unbearable, multiplied. This war, this genocide has taken so much from us, our homes, our loved ones, our sense of safety, but it has not taken our memories. Those memories, painful as they are all we have left. That's from Bashar Muammar's feature, I Will Never Forget You, on electronicintifada.net. Also this past week, the Electronic Intifada published Israel Killed My Brother's Family by Doa Salim, in which the author, like Bashar Muammar, recounts an Israeli airstrike that she survived but killed her brother Ahmed, his 6-year-old son Mahmoud, and 7 other people, including a stranger whom my brother had met wandering the streets homeless and had taken mercy on, according to Doa. She writes, quote, "It took me 40 days to go upstairs to Ahmed's flat, and I did so only because my mom had asked for help to clean the place. As I gazed out at their stuff scattered all over the place, there's no space for grief. I stretch out my hand. I can't. I feel all my memories of them rise to my throat. I try again. I can still hear Mahmoud's laugh. I can hold their stuff and clothes in my hands. I hold on to the hope that life will sprout again amid the massive destruction, like a broken and burnt olive tree grows under the rubble." That's from Doa Salim's feature, Israel Killed My Brother's Family, on electronicintifada.net. As we turn to the enormous events of the last week in Lebanon, I wanted to share 3 videos from Gaza as the barrage of Iranian missiles crossed the sky into Israel. This video from journalist Anas Al-Sharif was filmed in Jabalia.
فرحة أهالي مخيم جباليا وهم يشاهدون المسيرات وإطلاق الصواريخ باتجاه أراضينا المحتلة. مشاهد هنا من سماء غزة.
Anas Al-Sharif also posted this one saying, quote, "For the first time since the aggression on Gaza began, I see joy in people's eyes, rejoicing at the missiles of the Islamic Republic of Iran flying in the skies of Palestine." And Aboud Batah, a young social media creator, was part of a spontaneous celebration in the streets. Finally, before we turn to Roqayah, we wanted to bring you this video by journalist Mahmoud Abu Salama and cross-posted by Translating Palestine. Over the weekend, Palestinian children in Jabalia refugee camp in Gaza, quote, "gathered to donate what they could to Lebanon, despite their own suffering. Standing side by side, these children extended their support to those affected by the violence in southern Lebanon, demonstrating resilience and solidarity even amidst their own hardships." And I'll just narrate the translations. Abu Salama says, quote, "We are here at the displacement center at the Jabalia Services Club in the northern Gaza Strip. This is one of the meanings of resilience and challenge. And the donations of children to the people of Lebanon, those affected in Lebanon, in South Lebanon, this amount of all these children standing side by side with the children of our dear Lebanon. This is an initiative in the northern Gaza Strip in one of the displacement centers. These are children who are donating despite their own wounds to Lebanon." And that's it for the news roundup. As always, go to electronicintifada.net for much more, especially to read our new features by our brave writers in Gaza. And you are watching and listening to the Electronic Intifada live stream. I'm Nora Barrows-Friedman with Ali Abunimah. And we're going to turn to Israel's assassination of Hasan Nasrallah last Friday and its escalating assault on Lebanon. On Sunday alone, Israeli airstrikes killed 105 people across the country, according to the Lebanese Health Ministry. Over the last year, Israeli attacks have killed 1,700 people in Lebanon, half of them in the last 2 weeks. Israel's ability to wage the pager and walkie-talkie attacks that killed dozens and injured thousands in Lebanon 2 weeks ago, then to assassinate numerous senior Hezbollah figures in quick succession, and finally Nasrallah himself, was seen as a triumph by Israel and the United States. President Joe Biden praised Nasrallah's assassination as a, quote, measure of justice, making no mention of the horrific toll of civilians killed in the Israeli attack. But for people in Lebanon, across the region, and around the world, Nasrallah's death is an immeasurable loss. They look to him as an historic anti-colonial resistance leader, an astute strategic thinker, a spiritual and moral guide, and as a person capable of instilling in them the belief that the liberation of Palestine from Zionism and the wider region from American imperialism is a reality that is within their grasp. Nasrallah led Hezbollah since 1992, assuming his role after Israel assassinated his predecessor, Abbas al-Musawi. Over 3 decades, Nasrallah built Hezbollah into a formidable political organization and military machine capable of deterring and even defeating Israel's powerful US-backed military. The Israeli shock and awe campaign of recent weeks left people in Lebanon and across the region dazed and demoralized, as Israel appeared to be gaining the upper hand after a year of military failure in Gaza. But as Israel signaled on Monday that it planned to send ground forces into Lebanon, Hezbollah has moved to restore confidence. In a televised address on Monday, Naim Qassem, the Deputy Secretary General of the Lebanese Resistance Organization, said that the Lebanese resistance group was prepared for a long fight with Israel, which it would win. Quote, "We will not waver from our true and honorable positions," Qassem said. "The Islamic resistance will continue to confront the Israeli enemy in support of Gaza and Palestine while defending Lebanon and its people." Speaking 3 days after Israel's assassination of Syed Hasan Nasrallah, the group's legendary leader of 3 decades, Qassem offered his condolences to the Lebanese people. "We lost a brother, a beloved comrade, a father, a commander," Qassem said. "We know that the battle may be long and the options are open before us." He asserted that Hezbollah is, quote, "ready if Israel decides to enter by land," and, quote, "confident that the Israeli enemy will not achieve its goals and we will emerge victorious from this battle." Joining us now to talk more about the situation in Lebanon is Roqayah Chamseddine. Roqayah is a Southern Lebanese researcher and reporter currently in Lebanon. She's also the co-host of the fantastic podcast, Delete Your Account. Welcome, Roqayah.
Thank you both for having me today. I really appreciate it. And I genuinely feel honored being on.
That's an honor to have you. What's the situation where you are right now and how are you doing?
I'm well, despite everything. Israel's still unloading as much as it can across the southern suburb, which I frequently visit. That is my second home after South Lebanon. But despite all of this, I genuinely feel that the tide is turning, and the killing of Syed Hasan was a pivotal moment that the entity will soon regret.
And you talk about the tide turning, Roqayah. The news coming in right now is that throughout today, Wednesday, Israel has been taking heavy casualties in the 2 villages of Marun al-Ras and Al-Aqsa in southern Lebanon. Israel has already announced 8 of its soldiers killed and 39 injured. There may well be more. And so that will probably go a long way towards, let's say, a reality check for Israel. But let's talk first about Syed Hasan Nasrallah. He was, by all accounts, an iconic leader. But tell us why he meant so much to his supporters, as well as to people across the region. And how have people been coming to terms with his killing, his martyrdom?
Well, I was surrounded by, I was in a cafe whenever it was revealed that he was assassinated. And at first, many people shouted, "It's impossible." They would not believe it. And then that soon led to wailing. I've never seen men cry as loud as I have. One thing that really burns into my memory is a man yelling out, "𝐴𝐵𝐷𝐼 𝐸𝐿," which means my father died. And he collapsed on the floor, and strangers were holding him up. And because of the attacks on South Lebanon, there are a lot of southern Lebanese now throughout Beirut, and many of them were openly weeping, holding one another. So it's a testament to how much Syed Hasan's arrival meant to all of us. He was the first to liberate our villages. He helped liberate South Lebanon. And then, as you mentioned previously during the show, defeated Israel again in 2006. He was a father figure. He was a very noble leader. And his sacrifice is a testament that the struggles of the people of Gaza are no different from ours. This is a shared path with similar sacrifices, and the blood of everyone in Gaza is intermingled with ours now, today and throughout history.
And I just want to, Syed Hasan, a few months ago during this war, his mother passed away, and he gave a speech. You know, he's given a lot of his speeches are just legendary, and everyone tunes into them. The speech he made on the occasion of the passing of his mother, I don't know if you heard it, Roqayah, but it was one of the most personal speeches that I had ever heard him give, where he talked about his childhood, his very modest upbringing in a community that was very, multi-religious, multi-ethnic. This was before the Civil War. And he talked about how he thought about that as the model for the future Lebanon he wanted. Just say a bit more about his character and how people saw him. And I mean, I hate to even reference the disgusting, vile, grotesque stereotypes and dehumanizing images of him that are in Western media, but just talk about the difference between how he is seen in the region, particularly in his own country, and how he's seen in the West, with you, of course, having, like many of us, a sort of an existence in both of those spheres.
Absolutely. Syed Hasan his approach to politics were very, on one hand, very soft and delicate. He was known to be charismatic and funny. There are clips going around now in light of the attacks from Iran of him laughing. But at the same time, he was incredibly sharp and well-focused and organized. He wanted a Lebanon that was very pluralistic, where all of us could live together, because that is the Lebanon of today. Despite everything that's happening, we've all banded together despite what Israel has unleashed upon us. And I want to reference something he said, because you talk about his speeches. One of the most monumental speeches for me was when he said, "You don't know who you're fighting today. You're fighting a people who have a faith that no one else has on the face of this earth." And Syed Hasan, he wasn't just a page in history. He was a path built on the unshakable principle of resistance that has helped keep not just South Lebanon free, but all of Lebanon free. Without resistance, it isn't just that South Lebanon would still be occupied. It is that we would be under the boot of the United States and America, from the south to the north and everywhere in between. And I think he is a model for someone who is principled, and yet at the same time is able to rise up much stronger than ever. If you look at the Hizb back whenever they first began, it was a handful of people, and now they are the most formidable group of men who are fighting on behalf of our country. And Israel, in all its cowardice and barbarity, didn't deserve a noble adversary like Syed Hasan.
Roqayah, this happens over and over again, right? Israel and Washington clearly hope that by assassinating the head of a resistance movement, they can collapse that movement and
Right.
remove the most, formidable obstacle to Israel's subjugation of the region, as they, clearly hoped assassinating Nasrallah would do. What has been Hezbollah's response to his death? Do its supporters still have confidence in the organization after a series of really devastating blows?
So the goal of assassinating Syed Hasan wasn't just to further inflict psychological terror on all of us throughout Lebanon, but to decouple the northern front from Gaza and bring to fruition what Netanyahu's promise to return the settlers to the north. But since the killing of Syed Hasan and 𝐓𝐡𝐞 and Wissam al-Tawil and Mohammed Hussein Sroor and all the other commanders assassinated by Israel and the US, the northern front has remained active, and the resistance operations are continuing even at this very moment to reach deeper and deeper into the entity. I mean, today, the Hizb announced that it confronted an Israeli enemy infantry force that attempted to infiltrate the village of Al-Aqsa at dawn. And the village, by the way, is near the blue line, but they engaged with them, inflicted casualties, and forced them to retreat. And as a recording, there have been at least a dozen, likely more, Israeli soldiers who have been killed by Hezbollah, and that's before they've even stepped foot into South Lebanon. So these losses will continue to climb because the equation hasn't changed, because this was the rule from Syed. He said from the first day that the Hizb engaged with Israel in support of Gaza that the Lebanese front will not stop until the war on Gaza ends. And that is where it stands today. The Hizb isn't built in a way where if you kill the Secretary General, then everything else collapses. And they've actually been planning for something like this, for a devastating attack that would result in the killing of all of their commanders and their leaders. And we're watching now that no one has been shaken. Yes, we are mourning the passing. I genuinely still cannot believe that he was assassinated. It is a difficult pill to swallow, but if you read the letter that members of Hezbollah wrote in honor of Syed Hasan, they say, we reject humiliation and we will continue to fight. And the first engagements with Israeli forces on near the border, they dedicated it to Syed Hasan, 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐿𝐈, we are at your service, Nasrallah. And we would say usually, like, we're doing this in service of you. Now they say, we're doing this in service of your soul. So they are very committed and nothing has changed.
Let's talk about the situation in the Dahiyah, Beirut's southern suburb. That is, of course, where Israel carried out the massive bombardment that killed Nasrallah and flattened multiple high-rise buildings. And it is continuing to carry out attacks there every day and ordered residents of the area to leave their homes, just as Israel has done in vast areas in most of Gaza. What is the situation there now? You say that it's your second home, in terms of you're going there frequently. I remember visiting the Dahiyah quite a few years ago. What have you been seeing there now?
Well, now there are over 1 million Lebanese displaced by Israel as attacks on the south and the Dahiyah and other areas of Lebanon. But Israel's killing now on average 100 Lebanese a day. There's nearly 1,800 martyrs so far. They're, like you said, they're bringing down entire residential buildings on top of people in the Dahiyah, and those being made to flee are sleeping in the streets with nothing more than what little provisions they could carry with them. The Dahiyah is a poor area. I say فقيرة بس في حياة. Like, it's a poor neighborhood, but there's life. Very humble, very respectable, very resilient people. And when I go and speak to them, it's comforting to hear how strong they are despite what's going on. Israel has been following the Gaza formula by trying to say, we're giving you warning before you have to leave everything, and then we're going to bomb your entire neighborhood, bombing near Al-Zahra hospital the other day, bombing near pharmacies, kindergartens in the Dahiyah. This is a very densely populated area. So whenever they're doing their so-called precision strikes, they are aiming to maim, kill, and debilitate the entire surrounding areas in the suburb. And I've seen it with my own eyes after they hit 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐞𝐿 So it's very horrifying. But despite this, speaking to my people every day has only made me realize how resilient the people of the 𝐓�‌𝐞 truly are, and the people of the South. There was an interview with one woman who was displaced from her village who said that while her displacement is weighing heavy on her, and while she's sleeping on the streets now, she's seen what's happening to the people of Gaza who are dying hungry, she said. And she's willing to continue on this path and to even die on this path so long as they stop the genocide in Gaza. And as a Southern Lebanese woman, it pains me to see my people leaving their villages, huddled together in their cars or laying on the roads. But I cannot tell you how proud I am that we answered the call when the world stood silent. And my mother once said something to me that this is a bitter drink that we're being forced to consume, but we will drink it together.
It says so much. You mentioned that there have been about 1 million people displaced from their homes. That's about a fifth of the country's population. Tens of thousands are entering Syria. Some of them were refugees from the Syrian civil war who are now going back to Syria because they're being displaced from Lebanon. How are people coping with such an enormous humanitarian challenge?
They're sharing this bitterness and the misery with each other. They're opening their homes. At a cafe that I frequent, the owner couldn't stand seeing all of these families sleeping right in front of his cafe, and he told them, come every day, you'll eat here on my dime, and every night you'll sleep here, and I don't want to hear anything other than you'll accept it. People are helping one another. Our hospitals have been hit tremendously by what Israel did before even beginning the killings in the South during the attacks, the communications device attacks. Now you have to wait if you're looking for non-emergency services, but everyone is doing their part. We're all banding, together, because the only way out of this is by standing strong and firm, because we're now in the eye of the storm, in my opinion. And the only way that we will survive is by holding even tighter to the rope of resistance for one another. And I will tell you that Israel is fighting against the people that fear humiliation more than death. And you can't defeat people like this. They killed Syed Hasan, and they ended up inflaming the hearts of countless more who've taken up the struggle that he spent, 30 decades or 3 decades pursuing. So this isn't the end by any means. The occupation is going to end, and it will end in our arena and on our terms.
Roqayah, I want to talk about the South, which is where you're from. But before I do that, I want to tell you just a little story about my own. I've been to the South a couple of times, but the first time I went was, I think it was in June of 2000. And this was just weeks after the liberation of the South from more than 2 decades of brutal Israeli occupation. And I visited the South with friends from the South, and I remember it was stunning. I remember we went up to Israeli military outposts that were high on top of hills that looked out over the beautiful, rugged, mountainous landscape of the South, and you could tell they had just fled. I remember seeing cans of food that were still there, clothes that were still there. They looked like they had just upped and ran away. We went to Khiam prison, the torture camp that was originally built by French colonialists, and we were given tours of the cells by former prisoners who told us of the horrors that they had experienced there at the hands of Israel and the South Lebanon Army collaborators, the Lebanese version of the Palestinian Authority, if you like. And I remember seeing the torture chamber with the electrical wires attached to car batteries and attached to wall outlets that Israel used. What I remember most was the joy of people in the South, people streaming home from Beirut, who had been displaced for many years, welcoming us. It was just a celebration. And this was already about 3 or 4 weeks after the liberation. And there was a feeling that it had just happened yesterday. So I just, for me personally, that experience was what made me believe liberation is possible. Because the context at the time, the political context in Palestine was of the Oslo Accords and this endless process and the Palestinian Authority becoming, the proxy for Israel. And then you had South Lebanon, which was just pure liberation and the joy and ecstasy of liberation. And that made me believe we'll see it, not just in Lebanon, but in Palestine too. I wanted to share that, but
No, I'm glad you shared that. I'm so glad you got to visit our southern villages, because the fragrance of life in the South is very different than anywhere else. And yes, I might be biased, but I feel like I can breathe whenever I'm back in South Lebanon. It's where one village, Mita, they say it's where heaven meets earth. Our village of 𝐓𝐡𝐞 is very close to the mountain. And we have two villages that are our family villages. The other one's very close to the border. When you are there, it is as if you were alone with whatever creator you worship, or whatever you have inside your soul. It is beyond anything imaginable. I have been taught the meaning of life because of my upbringing as a Southern Lebanese person. Like and dignity. It's something I've said before, is that in the South, dignity is our currency, which is something our occupier will never understand.
And, I remember another thing. Some people who are a little older, it's hard for me to believe how many years ago it was, because to me it seems like yesterday. But the great Edward Said had gone to the South right after the liberation. Many people had gone to visit. And the Israelis had fled along with their collaborator army. I mean, it was literally, nobody expected that Israel would just flee the way it did. It was incredible. Right. And so there was no border fence, there was no fortifications, there was just this little wire fence, and in some places there was no fence. And the Israeli houses were literally right up to the border, because they had controlled the whole South for decades. So for them, it was all quote unquote Israeli territory. And I remember this one point we reached where there was a ridge, and the ridge was on the Israeli side of the line, and there were actually Israeli tanks up on the ridge. And then below the ridge, on the Lebanese side, there was one Hizballah soldier, just one. And it was just like he was standing there in the open. And the reason he was there, and they were stationed along the fence, was to protect the people coming, to make sure they wouldn't get too close to the Israelis, and then be harmed. But what was so striking was that those Israeli tanks were right there, the Israeli soldiers were right there, and none of them would have dared to touch or to fire at this soldier from Hizballah. And again, to me, that's something I'll never forget, because it underscored the strength of the resistance in the South. Talk about what you think is happening there now. We've seen the battles already today. How are people in the South going to, they're going through this again after all the decades of occupation they faced. Are they going to be able to do it?
Yes, they absolutely will. And I'm saying this with full confidence because of our history. There are people who have chosen to stay, members of my family. Some have left because they have children. Others, whenever Israel was bombing 𝐓𝐴, they also bombed it today. They killed a family of 3. But whenever they were bombing a week ago, some of my relatives all went to one relative's house and stayed together, because they would rather die all together than be separated. Some are choosing to stay, knowing that this might happen, because it's more dignified to die on your land this way, and they refuse to leave. Other people have left. And then, just so people understand what we've been through, there are people in the South who have rebuilt their homes multiple times. And when you go and speak to them, I've interviewed countless Southern Lebanese people. They said, yeah, my house might go, but it's worth it. Are we any better than Gaza? And not just that, this is for the sake of our liberation and our freedom. And I will rebuild, and I'm going to rebuild even better. Our people are truly just steadfast in a way that cannot ever be quantified. So we're witnessing this firsthand by the men of Hizballah who are fighting the IDF, one of the most well-armed military groups in the world, and they're defeating them before they even come inside the South Lebanon. Because as I said, this is our arena now. They've entered our territory. They cannot defeat a people like this who do not fear death and who fear humiliation more than anything else on this earth. So yes, we will be victorious. And we're going to see a liberation day for Palestine, just as we did for South Lebanon.
One other question that I have, Roqayah, is, there is, of course, all this support for Syed Hasan Nasrallah, and that's been visible after his martyrdom, not just in Lebanon, but there have been massive demonstrations in Pakistan, in Kashmir, in Iraq. There have even been demonstrations in Jordan and in other countries where he's seen as this anti-colonial figure. But there's also this narrative that I have to put to you, that Hezbollah and Nasrallah played, that they intervened in Syria, and that how can they claim to be defending dignity and liberation when they took sides with the Assad regime in Syria in a war against the Syrian people. This is something I've seen bubbling up in the last few days, and I want to give you a chance to respond to that.
This is something that's been said for a very long time, and there have been people who supported the proxy war in Syria who are celebrating the assassination of Syed Hasan, and even taking Arabs have been doing this and flaunting every Hizb casualty and mocking the deaths of Hizb soldiers. But were it not for for Hezbollah intervening in Syria, we would not be able to say that Gaza would survive as long, or Hezbollah would be able to survive as long, because the axis of resistance is a collective that works together. And I mean, at the end of the day, I'm actually more confident that people are realizing what the Syria war was, and that it was a proxy war waged on behalf of US interests in our region that did not succeed. And it did not succeed because of, namely, the Lebanese resistance.
Mm. And an interesting point, I wrote about this in a piece on the Electronic Intifada, but there was a really interesting interview that Roqayah Chamseddine, who we've had on this program several times, did with the veteran journalist Elijah Magnier about how Israel actually managed to carry out the assassination of Hasan Nasrallah, and or at least of the other senior commanders. And some of the reporting that's come out is that it had to do with their involvement in Syria, because by being in Syria, they were exposed to all the intelligence services and spooks, the Western spooks, including Israel, who were involved in the dirty war, you could call it, in Syria. But the way it was put in some of that reporting, and I think also Alistair Crook, the former British diplomat, talked about this on the Judge Napolitano show, is that for Hezbollah, they had to take that risk because otherwise the United States and Israel would have succeeded in basically letting ISIS and Jabhat al-Nusra take over Damascus,
Absolutely.
which would have been a catastrophe for everyone in the region, to have another failed state after Libya and after Iraq and so on. So the question being not so much about, do people love or hate the government of Syria? People are always, I believe people are always entitled to rise up against their government. But as you said, it was a proxy war, and their intervention to stop the fall of Damascus to these US and Israeli proxies was ultimately what meant they were more exposed in terms of being able to be infiltrated. So there is even a connection to the Syria war to the tactical successes Israel had in recent weeks. I'm just reflecting some of the reporting I've read, but I think worth something we'll probably see more about in coming weeks.
Right.
Yeah. Just a few minutes left, Roqayah. Lebanon is a somewhat divided country. Nasrallah himself almost often addressed the party's opponents in his speeches. What's the mood like now? Do you think people in Lebanon are ready to resist yet another full-scale Israeli assault? Just today, there have still been attacks on Dahya around the south. What are people saying, kind of across the political class spectrum in Lebanon, as best you can assess?
I think even some of the Hizb's most staunch detractors have been surprised, and they've come out and said that, while we disagreed politically, he was a great figure and so and so. And I do think there is unity behind the assassination of Syed Hasan, because it's still something that is hard to believe because of how much he influenced our society as a whole, not just his political speeches, but his religious speeches as well, that he would deliver oftentimes. And we would listen to. He was a part of the fabric of our society. And I do think that people are ready to stand up to Israel, because the Hizb of yesterday is not the Hizb of today. The Hizb of yesterday was strong, but now they're even more organized and ready to confront Israel. And I do believe that people, while they are mourning, the confidence has not been shot. The Hizb took a big hit with the communications attack and then the assassination of their commanders, namely Syed Hasan. But talking to people every day, you can see that flicker of hope and readiness for whatever is coming. And those that are staying are willing to stay until the very end. Because I want to reference something that Hassan Nadur, Professor Hassan Nadur, a Lebanese writer, his niece, Aman Nadur, was killed by Israel in the southern village of Majlzoun. He said that even if the whole world abandons us, the war is ours and we will fight it tooth and nail. And that is where I think most people stand today here.
Well, that's it's very encouraging to hear, obviously. And Roqayah, you are just a beacon of light. Is there anything that you wanted to add, about the moment now, about, how things look in the south and at the boundary with Israel? What are you keeping your eye on closely?
I'm confident in our men in the Hizb, seeing how they've united together and come out even stronger after the killing of Syed Hasan. But I actually want to add something before you let me go, that I've seen a lot of Lebanese people in the diaspora appealing to the sentiment of the West and referencing Lebanon as the Paris of the Middle East, and we have this and we have that. But I want to make it clear that I'm not appealing to anyone on behalf of my humanity, because my humanity is not reliant on the sentiments of my occupier and its advocates. And the names of those who rose up after the genocide began in Gaza and have endured despite all the calamities that they face in Lebanon, in Yemen, Syria, Iraq, Palestine, they're written in blood, ink, and they're going to be etched in gold. These are the words of the PFLP referencing Aaron Bushnell, that his name would be written in gold, because every inch of our land here is resisting. Every capable hand is resisting, and we will continue to resist as long as necessary, because the equation hasn't changed and will not change. We will not abandon Palestine. Just like the Sayyid said, kill us under every rock and stone, wherever you may find us, we will not leave Palestine.
Incredible. Etched in gold for sure. Exactly. Roqayah Chamseddine, you are a journalist, writer, researcher and the co-host of the fantastic podcast Delete Your Account, which I'm sure a majority of our audience is already aware of. But if you're not, go check it out. Delete Your Account with Roqayah and 𝐄𝐥𝐿𝐈. Roqayah, please stay safe. Come back anytime. And thanks so much for being with us today.
Thank you both.
Roqayah.
No, thank you so much, Ali and Nora.
You're the best. All right. So glad we got her.
Yeah.
Absolutely incredible. So we still have much more to come, of course. Let's bring Jon on for the Resistance Report. Hey, Jon.
Great interview.
Yeah.
Thank you. We didn't have to do it. We didn't have to do very much.
No, she's
Roqayah is so brilliant.
Yeah.
It's terrific. And Abubaker, it's just great to see you. Shout out Abubaker. Good to see you.
Absolutely. And Jon, you spent a lot of time in South Lebanon. So yeah, I don't know. Before you go into your Resistance Report, I'm going to put you on the spot. Tell us about how you're looking at what's happening in the context of your reporting there so many years ago.
Well, the first time I really heard about Nasrallah was when I was working in Gaza in the Second Intifada, and I was really caught up in the moment working along the border. It was a hectic day, and I moved back into the town where I was staying, and everybody was picking up their shops and closing their doors. And I was like, what's going on? And they were like, oh, Abu Hadi's speaking. And then it was like, yeah, basically turned Gaza into a ghost town. And within a few minutes, you could hear out of every single window in the entire Gaza Strip, every building. It was like stereo all over Gaza, silent, everybody listening to what he had to say. And I never missed a speech after that. I figured if all these people are this plugged in, I better know more about why they're doing this. So yeah, just shout out to Gaza. I know that there's a lot of devastation to this loss. He's a world historical figure, and no one's going to downplay that at all. He's a devastating loss, and he was a people's leader. He came from his people, and he led in that way. He was an orator, an educator, a strategist, a military commander. He built what we're about to see in South Lebanon, it appears. The Israelis touch their toenails across the border and are all of a sudden, need multiple tweets to tell you how many people are killed. And I think that's going to continue. And I think that the assassinations of this top command, this founding leadership, is devastating. But I don't think it's going to have an impact on the readiness of the organization to fight for liberation. If anything, it may coalesce them. You have a generation of leaders who are enraged about what has happened over the last 10 days. And that fighting spirit, we'll be seeing it. I suspect. We don't need to make predictions. It's not clear how far the Israelis are going to go with this invasion, but if the first 20 feet that they've gone is any indication, this organization has been prepared for decades to fight this battle, and I suspect they will.
All right. Well, with that, thank you so much, Jon. Let's God, it's been a really slow week for you, I bet.
For everybody, it's disconcerting. It's shock and awe. I think Ali described it, and it's been absolutely shocking. It's been a shocking week, but the resistance fights on, and we will cover that in granular detail as we have for the last 11 months. And we will start in Gaza because that's the point of these attacks in Lebanon, is to split off, as Roqayah said, to split off the Gaza front and the Lebanon front, and to try to weaken Gaza's negotiation position by splitting off the more powerful Hizballah front in the north. So it has been a busy week, and just we'll throw up the couple maps here. Again, we're looking at Israeli focus on the Netzarim corridor and Rafah. the Netzarim corridor in the center. They removed the 98th Division. This was the Raider Division that we've talked about, the division that raided Shifa Hospital and Nasser Hospital. It's the division that raided Shujaiya for the second time and the Jabalia camp for the second time. And that fighting force with their paratroopers who just got smoked in Lebanon, they've been removed, and the Israeli military doesn't have the ability to replace that kind of fighting force. And that's why they had to move that division up to the northern border to fight in the north. And they can't do those two things simultaneously. So what we're seeing in Gaza is the troops focused on the Philadelphia corridor and moving their supply routes between the border of Israel. I mean, it's not a border, but the edge of the ghetto of Gaza. Those supply routes have been targeted this week, and there's been 7 qualitative operations this week targeting Israeli forces east of Khan Yunis and east of Rafah. And we're going to take a look at those on this show today. So let's start right with the first one. This is a 3-stage ambush here that we're looking at. Ambush, the promise of victory ambush. And here we see, again, commander troop leading procedures. The Israeli military told us these guys don't exist. And here we have a commander with a closed line. His sign notes that it's the ambush promise of victory. We're seeing aerial surveillance, drone footage, what the American and Israeli military called ISTAR, intelligence, surveillance, target acquisition, and reconnaissance. And we can see this is target acquisition. They're using this drone footage to track the supply route for the Israelis down to the Philadelphia corridor. You can see they've got eyes on this corridor, eyes on the supply route, I should say, heading to the corridor. You see their armored division there, their armored battalion there with multiple tanks, multiple Namr troop carriers, multiple D9 bulldozers. Fighters get in position, and the commander was detailing this operation. He was talking about how there's going to be 3 strike groups here. We're looking at strike group number 1, who's going to target this first Merkava tank. Look at how close he is to him. We have 2 cameras on each aspect of this ambush. So you get the first Yasin strike here, dead center of the tank. No apparent interception by the trophy system, too close proximity. So that's stage 1 of the 3-part ambush. The stage 2 here is aimed at this first D9 armored bulldozer in the convoy. Again, another strike right on the cage where the commander and the navigator are in the D9 bulldozer. Again, we see it from multiple angles. They have brought this media to us for the entire war, showing us the battle that we wouldn't see otherwise. And Hezbollah will do the same. Hezbollah was the founders of these kind of operations of embedding media into your fighting. This is the 3rd D9 bulldozer, gets it in the back engine area, debilitating. We saw last week a captured drone, and here we go with a medevac coming in again to rescue injured soldiers. Maybe we could loop it around one more time because I just want to talk about some of the things that we're seeing. So promise of victory ambush here. We see a barrel chopped AK-47, Chinese AK-47, barrel chopped off for close quarters battle. So you've got a close quarters battle fighter there. You see the closed line phone in front of him. He's working on a computer connection. He's connecting it to this drone footage that's marking the route. And they've been on top of this. They say they don't exist, but they're out here running. These are not guerrilla operations in the standard sense of a ragtag guerrilla force. This is a military that has for sure taken losses. So has the Israeli military, and of course civilians take the most brunt. But we see here the fighting force in Qassam is still fighting in the exact same way that we've seen all throughout the war. They're not using different weapons. They're showing us our commanders. They're showing us their commanders ordering their troops into position. And he talks about it as 3 task force. There's 2 strike groups. So we're looking at strike group number 1 here. So you have, 8, 10, 12 people involved in this ambush itself. You can see the proximity these fighters are still getting to these vehicles. This is something in South Lebanon that the Lebanese have an asset because they have much more sophisticated anti-tank weaponry. And by early reports, as we were coming on air, there's a number of Merkavas that got smoked in Lebanon too. We're probably going to have to get towed home like they were in 2006. Wouldn't be surprised to see that later on today. I expect we'll see Hezbollah footage throughout this war. So this promises a victory ambush. This is the second kill zone of the D9 armored bulldozer. These are American-made Caterpillar bulldozers that have been wreaking havoc in Rafah for 25 years. All through the Second Intifada, they committed brutal crimes with these bulldozers. Americans may remember Rachel Corrie. Rachel Corrie was defending a row of houses in Rafah that the Palestinians defended for months before that. And so we see here another medevac chopper. And just an interesting note on the medevacs. In Vietnam, medevacs, U.S. medevacs in Vietnam, they just got a congressional gold medal for their service in Vietnam. And the pilots talk about 1/3 of their flights were targeted. Their medevac flights, their marked medevac flights from Vietnam were targeted. 1/3 of them by Vietnamese guerrillas. And we're still seeing 11 months in that the principles of the war fighters in Gaza have still not changed. They are not targeting medevac helicopters that are well within their range. So we see a complex ambush in Rafah there, promises of victory ambush, troop leading procedures, commanders, military structure, using weapons that we've seen them using all through the battle. So when you're looking for indications that the group has been dismantled, you don't see any of them in the fighting. You don't see it in the field reports. The field reports have been consistent. I'll give you a sense of those as we go through these first Gaza videos. But we had significant qualitative operations all week this week since you last saw me. 7 operations, 2 complex ambushes, 2 minefields, 7 armored vehicles hit in various strikes. And then we have the constant artillery attacks on the Netzarim corridor. So if we go to number 2 here, we're going to see Roqayah al-Quds carrying out those. This is their mortar teams, again, setting up, making sure they get their angles and their distances on these maps correct. They're 11 months into this battle. They have gotten better at this. And as you'll see in the footage of this, they're landing with these 107 millimeter rocket artillery and mortar rounds. And the mortar round here for Hasan Nasrallah, immediately they're able to communicate the death of Nasrallah and say his importance. This fighter says, "In the presence of the martyrdom of Syed Hasan Nasrallah, we say, as our Secretary General, Dr. Fatih Shakaki said, blessed is the party whose Secretary General becomes a martyr. For it is a party that does not die, and it is a party that is victorious." So you can see here the fighters, again, communicating with the outside world. We see him here loading a 120 millimeter round mortar bomb that's built in Gaza. These are Roqayah al-Quds built mortar bombs. These are not imported through the Philadelphia corridor. Philadelphia corridor is not the oxygen for the resistance. The oxygen for the resistance is inside Gaza, and it's in their tunnel networks. And you can see a tank there in that footage. They have eyes on the tank. They have eyes on multiple positions along the Netzarim corridor. This is the Netzarim corridor that splits Gaza in half. A number of people on foot, another of Gazans on foot, attempted to come up to the Netzarim corridor, and the Israelis shot them out of a crowd, unarmed civilians looking to come up to the border. So Israel has declared, you can see there, that's footage of the soldiers scurrying around underneath the mortar fire there that lands. And so these fighters are immediately able to get these reports out. Still, their communications haven't been impacted in any way. This report, this field report for this operation came out. The next day we see the video, and we see it with Nasrallah, timed all within less than a 24-hour window of time. And these fighters have been able to do this all throughout the war. And this is Roqayah al-Quds doing it, but all of the factions have this week been involved in shelling, mortaring the Israeli positions along the Netzarim corridor. And because the Israeli military lacks this 98th Division that's taking casualties, significant casualties today in the north, I think we're going to see a downtick in operations from the Israelis, which is what we saw this week. They just switched from that to massacring civilians. And the places where civilians are at this point in the battle are in the shelters that Nora talked about. They're in the orphanage that was bombed last night as part of 100 civilians being killed. So Israel is still able to kill from the air, kill from distance, from cowardly distance. But the face-to-face fighting, as we saw last week on the videos, the fighters are saying, come fight us face-to-face. You've cleared out the population from the battlefield. People aren't living in Rafah. Rafah has been completely ethnically cleansed and destroyed. It's a massive battlefield that if the goal was to fight and defeat Qassam, then you would go and fight in Rafah, where the fighters are of Qassam. Thousands, many thousands of fighters, not including new recruits, are ready to fight that battle. But Israel doesn't want any part of that. They bomb from the air, they bomb from the sky, they target civilians, in the only piece of land that's left to them in the Gaza Strip, which are these schools that should be teaching children now for the second year are closed and are really difficult living conditions for the Palestinians that live in those schools at the best of times, and then to massacre them in those schools, killing entire families, 4 generations of the same family taking shelter in a school in a place that you told them to go, the Israeli military, and then they attack them there by and so their field reports, I watch Israeli field reports every day too. Their field reports from Gaza have all but stopped. Their operations in Gaza have all but stopped in the last week. The only field reports, they say, are the massacres in the school, which I've been telling you for months that the Israelis have been bragging about these massacres. They call them Hamas command centers when they're destroying families in homes like that. So consistent all along. Let's go to number 3 tomorrow, because the Popular Resistance Committees released this video on their 25th anniversary. This is Jamal Abu Samhadana, who is a senior resistance leader in the Gaza Strip and the founder of the Popular Resistance Committees, Nasser Saladin brigades. And here we see a fighter introducing his anti-materiel sniper rifle, a 14.5 millimeter sniper rifle, larger than the Al-Ghul, the same size as the Al-Ghul version 1, shooting a 14.5 millimeter round. You can see behind him 25th anniversary of the Nasser Saladin brigades, who were founded as a fighting force by veteran fighters at the time of the Second Intifada. They were veteran fighters that founded the Popular Resistance Committees, and that was 25 years ago, the date. And this is rifle they're calling their AMA. And you can see there it indicates a 14.5 round, and you can see the size of the bullets that he's firing. And they dedicated this weapon to 2 previous snipers from the Second Intifada, the Al-Arkan brothers, who were famous in the Second Intifada, were assassinated in 2006. So again, shouting out their leaders' connection to their history. So it's called the AMA here. You're looking at 14.5 by 114 millimeters. The length of the weapon is 196 centimeters. 135 of it is a barrel. It weighs 14 kilos and fires a 64-gram bullet. That's what the indications that they want you to know. And the fighter said on the 25th anniversary of the launch of the Popular Resistance Committees, this weapon was put into service at the beginning of the war. So they're not showing you this because they just put this weapon together. They're saying that they have had this weapon in service throughout the battle. And the Popular Resistance Committees were founded in Rafah. Jamal Abu Samhadana is from Rafah, and he's a senior leader of the Palestinian resistance overall, a very popular leader. When he was assassinated, hundreds of thousands of people came to his funeral. His funeral march. He was a serious resistance leader in the Gaza Strip, and his fighting force, the Popular Resistance Committees, brought on action-based fighters from other parties, from other political groups in Gaza, because the Popular Resistance Committees were an action-based organization. So they attracted fighters from all factions, and Jamal Abu Samadana was made Interior Ministry in the early days of the Hamas, after the Hamas election. So he was put in charge of security overall in Gaza because of his legitimacy as a fighter and as a military leader. So interesting connection to that history, and to see another fighting force with these anti-materiel rifles that are critically important in this fight, because they reach up to 2 kilometers range. So it puts Israeli targets in these buffer zones when they're afraid to come in and fight. As we've seen many times, these sniper operations are taken in the buffer zone, when the soldiers are in the buffer zone believing that they're safe, or in their building with their curtains believing that they're safe. So that's a long-range weapon, an anti-materiel weapon, and the Popular Resistance Committees have that. And like I said, there was a minefield operation east of Khan Yunis that I believe we're going to see video of that later today. Early reports are that the Qassam brigades are putting out a video of that. There was also a complex ambush of 2 Nammers troop carriers, a tank, and 2 D9 armored bulldozers that required a medevac the other day. Multiple Yassins versus tanks versus D9s in east of Khan Yunis. Another Merkaba east of Khan Yunis. And then in the north, in Beit Lahia, Saraya al-Quds put out a field report that said that they hit an Israeli foot force with an explosively formed penetrator barrel bomb. And they put that field report out one day before the Israelis said, we did a pinprick operation, precise operation in Beit Lahia. So the resistance is telling you the truth ahead of the Israeli military. That's still been going on. And of course, there was the promise of victory ambush that we just saw, 12 mortar operations in the Nitzarim corridor, and 2 more in the edge, on the eastern edge of Khan Yunis. So that is the resistance report for this week from Gaza. And we will go to Lebanon next. From there, Ali did a great job of covering the Iran missile attack. So we will take it right to Lebanon, where more than 3,500 bombs dropped on so-called Hizballah positions. We know that there are all kinds of civilians caught up in this, in all of these operations. Hizballah this week admitted that 1,500 of its fighters were wounded in the pager and walkie-talkie operation. We know that the total number of injured in those operations was in the 3,000s. So we're talking about more than 50% of the pager hits were civilians, not fighters. And the Israelis this week talked about their delimited incursion into the border areas up in the Galilee Panhandle. And you can see here, the strikes are all over. They're all over Lebanon this week. And I just want to say, to the Nasrallah point, it's important to frame Nasrallah's assassination in the context that the Israelis put it in. And that is in a history, 40 years of defeats, consistent string of defeats organized by the fighters that he led right from the beginning, going back to the 1982 invasion, when they took out the early Hezbollah fighters of Islamic Jihad, took out the U.S. Embassy twice. They wiped out the CIA station. The entire Middle East station was wiped out. Going into the Iraq War, the CIA talked about how that attack in the 1980s left them with no intelligence for the Iraq War, because they lost a generation of CIA agents and knowledge and institutional knowledge in those operations. They also captured the CIA director or the station chief in Beirut in another attack. They hit the Marine Corps barracks and killed 240, drove the Americans out of Lebanon with that attack. They carried out multiple car and truck bomb attacks on Shabak, Israel's internal security that had set up in South Lebanon, famous attacks that really launched the Islamic resistance in many ways. There's the Ansariya attack, where Israeli special forces in 1997, under the command of Yoav Gallant, came across on a secret assassination mission that Hezbollah counterintelligence caught and wiped out the Special Forces naval commandos that on that raid in Ansariya, something that stuck in the Israelis' craw right till the 2000 fleeing of Lebanon, which we've talked about on this program, but involved literally running away from their positions, leaving their computers on. No more way to articulate a defeat than leaving your helmet hung up on the wall and just turn around and run down the hill, which is literally what the Israelis did. They ran down the hill, and the Palestinian and the Lebanese in the villages went up to Khiam, a famous torture prison, took rocks and broke into the prison and liberated the prisoners. These pictures were all over the world. They galvanized support for the resistance, for Hezbollah, of course. And then there's the 2006 war, where Hezbollah begins the war by crossing the border, capturing Israeli soldiers to exchange for Lebanese prisoners who did not get returned because the 2000 evacuation fleeing by the Israelis, there was no negotiation, so they didn't return prisoners. So Hezbollah crossed the border to capture prisoners, sparked the 2006 war that everybody admits. The Israelis' Blue Ribbon Panel admitted it was a defeat. U.S. war colleges were even more harsh on how big a defeat it was, that the Israeli military wasn't ready for the hardened fighters of Hezbollah that had been training for this battle. That was in 2006. Okay, that just takes you to 2006. In the years intervening, Israel was unable to do what it had done in Lebanon for the 2 decades before that. And when this war started, immediately Nasrallah opens up a northern front in support of Gaza. And that northern front liquidates Israeli communities from the north, creates for the first time in Israel's history a buffer zone inside Israel. The security zone, as it was called in Lebanon, is inside Israel for the first time. People like 60 Minutes, when I showed that clip of Leslie Stahl from 60 Minutes going into the northern communities, they're talking about humiliation, defeat, the loss of the north. They've given up all this land. They're never going to move back to there. The Radwan units on the border make it so that they'll never live there on those borders again. So it's just victory after victory that Hezbollah's organization, led by him as a military commander, just inflicted on the Israelis year after year, covering 4 decades before this event. And the chief of staff, or the trajectory, and through that, there had been assassinations of other key leaders, right? Imad Mughniya was assassinated in 2008, Mustafa Badruddin in 2013, Qasem Soleimani in 2020. But the trajectory of this organization hasn't changed by those significant losses, particularly Imad Mughniya, Haj Radwan, who the Radwan forces, special forces that Israel hasn't yet encountered but will encounter in their ground invasion, are named after. He was a devastating loss to the organization in 2008, particularly to their military. And the trajectory of the group doesn't change from those losses. The trajectory remains the same. And that's something that Nasrallah pointed out all the time in all of his speeches, because they have commemorative speeches as part of the popular education, is to teach people about the history of the resistance. And Nasrallah took that very seriously and did lectures constantly on annual basis, recognizing the martyrs that had come before. And so this assassination of Nasrallah happened at a time that Israel couldn't have imagined, where the United States would allow Israel to do whatever it wants, that it could carry out its Zionist fantasy of destroying Gaza and invading Lebanon and attacking Nasrallah. And Halevi said it. We need to continue attacking Hezbollah, he said. We have been waiting for this opportunity for years. So they see this as a moment to just go wild. And that's what you're seeing. And that's what we have been absorbing over the last 2 weeks of shocking events that Israel has inflicted, that will be humbled by a ground invasion into South Lebanon. We won't make predictions again, but we saw the fighting in 2006, and there's 18 years of preparation for this battle from both sides. Admittedly, Israel's intelligence on Hezbollah is a lot more significant than it is on Qassam. We haven't seen any of these kind of operations successful on Qassam. They've kept their internal network completely sealed, and there'll be a lot more to know about the details of the Nasrallah assassination and how it happened in the coming days. But it's not just Hezbollah leadership that's being taken out. The other day, Israel took out the top 2 commanders of the Abu Ali Mustafa brigades of the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, and they also assassinated with his family the leader of Hamas in Lebanon. So these border incursions that sound like they barely got across the barbed wire fence are the first face-to-face battles. But I'm going to show you this week, because I'm going to bring up everything that happened in the last week, even though events have overtaken some of these things, just to understand how we got to this position and to continue covering this on a week-by-week basis. Next week, we'll probably be having footage of face-to-face battles. But if we look at number 20 here tomorrow, the week began with red alert sirens all over Tel Aviv. Millions of Israelis, 2 million Israelis fled to shelters because the Glilot Mossad and Unit 8200 headquarters is at the Glilot intelligence base outside Tel Aviv. Ali talked a little bit about that because they were the target of the ballistic missile attack by Iran. So you can see number 21, Hezbollah showed us the missile. They're upgrading. They're showing us the next tier. They showed us last week the tier before this. Now they're showing the next tier of their ballistic missile. They're calling it the Qadr 1. It looks to be a modified Fatah 110, which is a precision-guided heavy payload rocket. And they're describing here a 500-kilogram warhead with a 190-kilometer range. And we need to keep those kilometer ranges in mind when Israel says they're doing a pinpoint, or a delimited is the word they're using, operation on the border, as if that will stop rocket fire. That's not the way it works. The rockets are not fired from the barbed wire border. In the case of this particular Qadr weapon, you have a 190-kilometer range. So you can fire deep into Israel from a firing position that's deep inside Lebanon. And as the war goes on, and as troops, if they do move into the southern area, to the border area, I'll believe it when I see it if they get past the border area. But they're still going to have these rockets firing over their head into the communities behind them. And that happened all week. So this is a precision-guided weapon, Hezbollah says. And it can maneuver in flight with precision. So if this level of munition were to be pulled out, Hezbollah hasn't pulled them out in en masse yet. The Israelis expected 4,000 rockets and missiles on the first day of a war. It's not clear if this would be counted as the first day of a war, but Hezbollah has the capacity to do that. And they're choosing at this point to slowly escalate. And as Nasrallah said, they don't want total war. They don't want their countries destroyed and their people killed. And famously, after the 2006 war, Nasrallah was asked if he regretted the operation that caused all that destruction in Lebanon. And he said, if I had known that cost, then yes, I would not have done it again. He's a very popular leader for decisions like that, not taking the destruction of a war and then throwing it on your people because it works to bolster your organization. He's a true popular leader, grown from the people and responding to the people in a way that nobody wants open war. Nobody wants total war. You try to operate in all ways possible before total war. And that's what we're seeing from Hezbollah. And we've seen that kind of patience all this week. They've been firing 300 rockets, which is double the amount of the peak of the 2006 war, but nothing like what they could do. If we look at number 22, these rocket attacks, they're going to show you the placement of these rocket attacks, 28 kilometers deep into Israeli territory, hitting these bases. And again, they're hitting these with the Fadi 1 and Fadi 2 rockets that I showed you on the last show that have 70 to 100 kilometers range. So these rockets can also be fired from well behind the border area that Israel says that if they have pinpoint operations, that the rocket fire will allow people to return to the north, which is not true. So this is a war to separate the Gaza and Lebanon fronts, the very thing Nasrallah said that they would not do. And so Israel's attempting that here. We're seeing consistently 300 rocket attacks each day over the past week, and the readiness of the fighters beyond the assassinations and their commanders of the founding generation, it's significant. But Hezbollah is trained in a different way than to be beholden to a centralized leadership. They fight small unit tactics, decentralized, and their leadership, their overall leadership, the commanders that were their commanders for 40 years are significantly important leadership, but they don't change the readiness of the organization because there's multiple levels of command, and it's devastating loss. But the force readiness is not impacted by these assassinations, as shocking as they are. To lose basically the entire leadership command. People talk about decapitation, that the leadership was decapitated. You could possibly say that the top echelon of their command was decapitated, but in a meaningful sense of the word decapitation would mean that once you've cut the head off, the rest of the organization doesn't exist. And that's not what happens. These rocket attacks, they come out, Hezbollah reports them in field reports. They come out every single day, 10, 12, 14, 16 qualitative operations, rocket barrages of the type that we're seeing here, hitting key institutions, military installations. You can see the settler cameras that Hezbollah likes to add to these videos to show you some of the places where they landed. And because we have the military sensor, let's do 23. And these attacks, the attacks that they have withstood over this, the 3,500 bombs dropped on Hezbollah targets all over Lebanon, particularly on their command and control and rocket platforms in the south. The Israeli military says that they've taken out 10% of Hezbollah's capacity. So we're talking about a war that is 362 days old, and they're only at 10%. And that 10%, that's above surface rockets. They're not able to reach their underground rocket facilities that we have shown on previous shows. So the 10% of 150 to 200,000 missile arsenal organization is minimal. And a portion of that 10% has been distributed throughout communities in northern Israel as well. And on number 24 is a qualitative operation. This is Hezbollah versus Shayatet 13, Flotilla 13. This is naval commandos of the Israeli military. They were previously clandestine secret unit. Hezbollah made it not that by showing exactly where their base is here. And we saw it in their drone footage earlier in the summer when they flew over it and showed us everything that works. So this is a drone swarm that Hezbollah is firing here, multiple drones being launched here at the Flotilla 13 base, at the Special Forces base. These are Ababil one-way attack drones. We've seen these be used a number of times. Hezbollah has half a dozen different types of drones that are explosive-laden one-way attack drones that they use on these different targets, military targets. Hezbollah is targeting military targets. The only civilian targets that Hezbollah has hit is evacuated settlements, and they have destroyed evacuated settlements in a manner in which the villages in South Lebanon have been destroyed. But if you'll notice, they never say in the media how many civilians have been killed by attacks from Lebanon, and it's because the number is something like 6 in a year. Hezbollah is not targeting civilians; they're targeting military bases, and that's what we see over and over in these operations. If they were targeting civilians, you could have death tolls in the tens of thousands based on their rocket arsenal and the population density. Were you to rain down these rockets on civilian, effectively to terror bomb like the Israelis do, bomb civilians in the hopes that those civilians will break away from their military leadership, which is what Israel does to the resistance. The resistance doesn't do that to Israel. It doesn't target their civilians to make the war unpopular. And number 25 here, this is a base, the Megiddo airfield being targeted here with Fadi 1, 2, and 3 rockets. Megiddo is the intersection of Armageddon, but it's also the home of a Israeli Air Force airfield, logistics airfield that they use as a backup. This is just north. This is around Afula. It's just north of Jenin in the West Bank. 60 kilometers from the border are these targets. So these targets are 60 kilometers from the border. They can fire them from 40 kilometers inside Lebanon. So Israel's not penetrating 40 kilometers inside Lebanon anytime soon. So it's not clear that these operations that Israel is carrying out right now and suffering such significant defeats already are going to attempt to try to regain territory at that depth. And as long as that's not happening, the rocket fire won't stop, and the communities in the north won't go home. And as Nasrallah said in his final speech, in fact, it'll make the war less likely. The war will make it less likely that Israelis return to their homes. And if they do return to their homes, they'll return to destroyed homes that are the product of this war that Hezbollah has carried on. So the Megiddo military airport is a runway and airport used by the Air Force for emergency and logistics. The Amos base is the main transportation and logistics support hub for the northern region. So that's feeding their troops with their supplies in the north. And then the third target was the main factory for explosive materials in the Zionist entity. It is 60 kilometers from the border. So they're targeting military bases, logistics airfields, and ammo production factories. And we know that they have this intelligence because they showed us it in the drone footage that they've put over. And if anything, they have been continually disciplined throughout the week. These operations didn't change at all. If you only followed the war through field reports from the Israelis and from Hezbollah, but particularly from Hezbollah, you wouldn't have noticed the calamity that was happening, the catastrophe that was happening in Beirut, to their leadership, to their senior-most leadership, their most respected founding leadership that have all of those victories I listed at the beginning notched on their belts. You can't see any impact on the readiness of the ability of the fighting force in Hezbollah. They fight in small units, decentralized, and talk today from the early incursion is that Radwan forces weren't even involved in the battle today. That cost the Israelis at least 8 killed soldiers and a number of destroyed Merkava tanks, apparently. That was just their territorial defense. It wasn't Radwan special forces coming in on that. So we had one more here. 27 is a rocket stitch of attacks on northern bases, and these happened just the other day. These are 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐿 300 millimeter rockets and Katyusha rockets, Grad rockets, and these are fired in barrages, as I've shown you before, between 28 and 40, depending on the unit launcher, one after another, and these are not intercepted. Despite the Iron Dome's vaunted record, as Ali pointed out in the Iran segment, the story of the number of these rockets to be shot down versus the number that are fired is wildly different than the Israeli estimates. Of course, we remember after the first True Promise operation by Iran, when Israel said that it was 99% effective. This time they said most. And we just watched in Ali's video dozens, scores of them clearly landing. Certainly some interceptions, but part of the Iranian attack was to target the radar stations that work the Arrow and David Sling, the medium and long range missile defense capabilities that Israel has. So they were targeted as part of that operation that also targeted the Mossad headquarters, the Nevatim Air Base, the Tal Nof Air Base that the fighter jets took off for the assassination of Nasrallah. A brutal assassination, a brutal war crime, more than 80 bombs 2,000-pound bombs daisy chained together with bunker busters and hitting the target in the same spot with 4 separate rounds, 4 double tap rounds on that strike. So that is the resistance report from Lebanon. We're going to go to Iraq because I brought Iraq on the show last week for the first time, but Iraq is in the fight, and Islamic resistance in Iraq, it's an umbrella group of many fighting groups, and they've been carrying out operations. If we look at number 30, they sent 2 Shahed 131 drones at the port of Eilat, and they showed these drones being launched here. And then a couple hours later, we get footage from the port itself, which is the port of Eilat is bankrupt, basically ghost town, since the Houthi Ansarallah Yemeni armed forces naval blockade in the Red Sea. The port at Eilat is basically non-functioning. It still does, however, host a naval dock, and that is what was targeted by these drones. If we do 31, you can watch here. This is Israeli military footage of the drone strike landing. So we're getting multiple confirmations of these attacks by the Islamic resistance in Iraq, showing that they are successful. This is at least the second time that they have hit the port at Eilat. Also, Ansar Allah hit the port at Eilat. The Yemeni armed forces hit the port at Eilat as well. So this was at a warehouse at the naval docks. They showed footage of it, but then they took it down, showing the naval dock warehouse is where this was hit. And they had to say that their Sire 6 warship, Corvette class warship, shot down the other one. So $2 billion warship shooting down $20,000 fiberglass drone. So that is the nature of the fight in the Iraqi front. And then if we look at 32, I stitched together a whole bunch of these just to show you what they've been doing this week. 4 operations a week, every day. Number 32. You can just see they're constantly interacting, doing the same thing that the fighters in all fronts do, saluting each other, saluting the other fronts, targeting Israeli military positions. These are military positions in the occupied Golan, military positions in Eilat, where the port is, and military positions in the Jordan Valley. And these attacks, they put together these videos and are being released regularly. I stitched them together for time and effort, but these were not all at once. These are long-range cruise missiles that are launched, the rocket-launched cruise missiles that we're seeing be launched here. These are Sumar class long-range cruise missiles. These are an effective weapon as well. We've seen those launched a number of times. Those are the ones you see going up that look like a missile. It's a cruise missile, a winged missile. And it's long distance, explosive laden, one-way attack drone, a suicide drone, a kamikaze drone, kamikaze cruise missiles aimed at Israeli bases. And there was 4 of these operations each day of the week. So 28 operations since you last saw me, targeting those 3 sites. And these operations are also communicating the date on them. Many of those I've cut off the date on them because we're trying to keep these videos online from various different threats that we face. So we've cut those, but the dates are on every video. They show a little card before each video. These are the Al-Aqsa, again, the long-range cruise missiles. They're a very spectacular launch. And this was, these are targeting the Golan Heights, these cruise missile attacks. And then we see a bunch of drone attacks that were this week as well. And these drone attacks are effective. The drones are effective because they vex Israel's radar system and their aerial defense system doesn't do well with the fiberglass wooden propeller motor engine drones. They're because they don't have an intense heat signature because of the smaller engine and the fiberglass, and the wooden. They're rocket launched there. They're rocket assisted. But once they're in the air, they're very difficult for the Israelis to pick up. If the Israelis calibrate their radars such that they can catch these drones, their radars are then too sensitive. They're too hot, and they'll bring in, they'll start scrambling multi-billion-dollar F-35 fighter jets for a flock of seagulls that fly in off the sea. And so flying low, flying slow, what we talked about with Hezbollah last week. Again, here you can see them saluting the resistance following the assassination of Hasan Nasrallah. You're going to see in this next one, they salute 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐞𝐜𝐿, who was the Radwan forces commander and became the overall commander of Hezbollah after Fuad Shukr was assassinated. And so those fighters all communicating with each other in these videos, but also sending out qualitative military operations. There's 𝐓𝐡𝐞 that they're saluting, and they've got the Yemeni, Palestinian, and Iraqi flags for us there. And again, rocket-assisted drones that are long-distance drones because you're covering a fair distance from Iraq. Here's the shout-out to Nasrallah that happened immediately after his death. And so they're able to report and connect and communicate. Their communications networks are, like in Lebanon and in Gaza, are very responsive. They're not doing this 2 days later, 3 days later. And of course, the loss of Nasrallah is significant and devastating to all of these support front groups that are carrying out these operations. So I think that's it for the Iraq front. And then there's just a little bit here from Yemen, because Yemen didn't sit it out. They didn't sit out this week. They carried out attacks. If we look at 40, that's what they did. They gave sirens to 2 million Israelis running to their shelters. 16 people tripped and fell during that. They launched a Palestine 2, which was the ballistic missile that I broke down for you a couple shows ago, and also the Yafa drone for the second time. The Yafa drone was the drone that the Ansar Allah and Yemeni armed forces flew 2,000 kilometers out to sea and then came into Tel Aviv from sea and went through the missile defense and hit directly in Tel Aviv, aiming for the former U.S. Embassy that had been moved. So we have the video coming up in the next slide of this operation. Oh, this is actually the downing of the drone. So they also in this week, this crazy week of many events, they also got another MQ-9 Reaper drone that you're looking at here. This is Ansar Allah Yemeni Armed Forces missile force downing another $30+ million MQ-9 Reaper drone. This will be the 11th. This will be the 11th of the Battle of the Red Sea, at least 14th since Ansar Allah got those weapons in the item is the item 358 is what we believe are taking these down, and that missile dates to 2017. Since that time, they've gotten 14 American flagship MQ-9 Reaper drones, the flagship of the American Air Force. So, and this one, what we're looking at here, it has 500-pound bombs still attached on it. You're going to see one of the Yemeni fighters step up on there's the 500-pound bomb there. He's going to step up on it after, and it's also still equipped with two Hellfire missiles. So this was there's the Hellfire missiles. So these are still armed drones. This is the second or third time we've seen still armed drones. And there's a fair bit of reverse engineering capacity that it's in that rubble, in that wreckage, that will be of use to the drone forces in several countries, including Iran. And then you get the Lebanese man telling you how it is. You know exactly what he's saying. And he's right in what he's saying. So that is the resistance report for this week. Multiple front battle under difficult conditions for the resistance, and for all people of justice anywhere in the world. Nasrallah was a linchpin of anti-imperial struggle, and he will be impossible to replace, even if the next leader is a world historical leader as well. You can never replace Nasrallah. So that is the Resistance Report for this week.
Thank you so much, Jon. God, there was so much that happened. Thanks for curating that.
Yeah.
So many fronts. I mean,
So many fronts.
Yeah, and thanks
Lord.
to Jon for talking about Israel's goals in Lebanon that we hadn't discussed earlier in the program. So I really thought that was important, that there is no possible logical connection between Israel's stated goal of returning its settlers to the north and what it's actually doing. And so you explaining that this is about trying to break the link between Lebanon and Gaza. And of course, it's also about breaking the resistance in general, I think cannot be emphasized enough.
yeah, I mean, what's the possibility? You know, we've talked about this many times over the last, 12 months, but what's the possibility of their settlers even going near the north at this point? I mean,
What's the possibility that this fight's going to move into the north of
Yeah.
Israel? I don't see. I'd be just as we shouldn't speculate, but
Yeah.
I'd be just as likely to see, in my mind, fighting in Kiryat Shmona than I do fighting north of the Litani River.
Yeah.
These fighters are different. They're different. They've been trained. They fight in small unit tactics that aren't impacted by overall structural losses to their senior leadership. Their tactical level leadership is still intact, and if it's not, and if it is a catastrophe in that, they're trained to fight as small unit tactics. They're able to fight decentralized on their own. And that was the story of the 2006 war, and why in the 2006 war, the Radwan units, they weren't called them then at the time, but why their special forces units didn't need to join the fight, because the territorial fighters in the villages that we're talking about are a more formidable foe than Israel can handle that alone.
Right.
And also think about how many settlers have returned to the Gaza envelope over the last year.
Right.
Think about how many of the captives Israel has freed from Gaza. Notice how Israel doesn't even talk about them anymore.
No.
Doesn't even.
They better not.
We've been.
They just left them there to die.
I mean, we've been saying it for a year. We know now from the reporting we've done and over the last year that they actually killed them. They were trying to kill them as they were being taken into Gaza. I mean, they were Hannibaling them on the way to Gaza. And those who they didn't kill on the way to Gaza, they killed many of them in Gaza, and the rest they just don't care about. I mean, it's incredible.
The entire region west of the frontier settlements with the Gaza Strip was essentially a free fire zone for the drones, for the aircraft, and even in some case tanks.
Yeah, but even inside Gaza, there was those guys in Shujaiya, the soldiers that came out and took their shirts off
With the white flag.
They fought in a dehumanizing army, so they thought if they stripped and came out and said, put SOS in Hebrew on the wall, and they were hunted down and killed. Yeah. So Israel treats, and then every couple weeks, we get confirmation of things we knew in December, like that whole group of 6 soldiers was killed during that airstrike that the family said back in January that they knew Israel killed them. And those are just the stories that we know about. And there's no way going in the way that they're going into Lebanon. There's no way you're then going back into Gaza to then find these captives. Whether that was even part of their plan, there's been no point in the war in Gaza where it has looked tactically like their plan is to try to find their captives. They don't fight that way. They bomb everything. We've been watching it with disgust for a year. They bomb everything. And all of those places that they bomb are the places that their captors were living, because the Palestinians put them in with families. They didn't just chain them to the walls in a tunnel like the Zionist nightmare was. They actually crossed the border and put families with families, let them live above ground in family homes.
There was a case of an Israeli family that some of the Israeli captives were released in the prisoner exchange back in November that testified that the Palestinian fighters protected them physically, like literally physically protected them with their bodies from Israeli aircraft bombing them in the Gaza Strip. So this, like you say, John, this is what we know about, right? These are the stories we know about. And it's simply a fact that the Israelis have killed more of their own captives inside the Gaza Strip than they've rescued.
I mean, if I could just say something like, listening to this and then listening to, also what we just saw with Iran, and then listening to Jon and listening to Asa reflect back to October 7th. I mean, where is this going now? We're a few days away from the first anniversary. There are so many steps, so many stages where you see clearly Israel has failed by any standard, by its own standard, and yet at no time does it retreat. Israel failed on October 7th. It failed every day since October 7th. All it has done is murder people and commit crimes. It had those few tactical successes in Lebanon, not insignificant ones, but it hasn't destroyed Hezbollah as a fighting force, as we've seen just, the reversal between the triumphalism in Israel just a few days ago to the reality check now after we saw those dozens of missiles. It's like just the lies that are told, like Joe Biden just lying, and the Pentagon came out with another statement saying, I think it's actually an additional statement, not, I have to double check this, but I saw a report that they're still saying that their assessment is Israel shot down most of the missiles. And it's just absolute lies. And then now, Iran is saying, if you come after us, if you attack our infrastructure, we're going to attack you harder. And of course, we heard this from Mohammed Marandi and other sources in Iran are saying it, like, you set our oil refineries on fire, as Israel is threatening to do now. We'll set all the oil refineries in the region on fire. And they can clearly do that. We've seen that. And of course, there was the attack on the Saudi Aramco refineries and facilities a few years ago that emanated from Yemen, I believe, that was just devastating. And Saudi Arabia could do nothing to stop it. So every stage, you think, if Israel isn't going to stop, the United States has to stop it. And yet they don't. And that is the thing that is like, just, I don't know what to say. It just...
Yeah, it's remarkable
like
self-sabotage. Yeah.
It's almost like they're encouraging them. And then there's 4 months that we have on deck here before, a new president takes the White House, and neither one of them seem to be people who are going to step into what's happening in Gaza. And it's just devastating because, when we see Abubaker, it's like, when you talk about 4 months from now, people of Gaza, it's an everyday emergency. And saying, Biden's a lame duck president for this next period. He's a lame duck president for 4+ months.
He's a lame duck president who can pick up the phone right now
and save his legacy.
Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin and say, stop the airlift of bombs to Israel. Tell them they had better not drop another bomb. That's how lame this lame duck is. He could do that right now.
He could do that and lose nothing because he's retiring, right? He could do that on his way out, like Eisenhower did on his way out. Give a speech about the industrial military-industrial complex. There's, acting in a way he wasn't for his entire presidency. Biden has an opportunity to do that. How much more humiliated can you be by an ally than what Netanyahu does to Joe Biden? He just makes him look like a fool over and over and over again, and he takes it.
Yeah.
Well,
I think it's just because we feel it in our hearts really deeply, because I know all you guys feel every single day is one day too long of what's happening in Gaza. We can't, as journalists, writers, activists, we can't accept 4 months from now or timelines that say year, 2, 3 years. We can't do that. Abubaker described people are living in the most dire circumstances, and it cannot continue. And
that's why we've seen these scenes from all over Palestine, celebrating the strike by the Iranians on the military targets within occupied Palestine, within present day Israel. Palestinians that I talk to are just happy about it, because it's like that feeling you were talking about, John, that we have of like, well, someone's doing something, right? We don't want to see this going on for another year. We don't want to see it going on for another day.
Yeah.
Max Blumenthal made the comparison. He said that Iran's operation last night is the moral equivalent of bombing the railroads to Auschwitz during the Holocaust. I can't disagree. I can't disagree with that. But if you just think about what that means, it turns on its head the whole sort of propaganda apparatus of morality and human rights and everything that people have been indoctrinated with for decades at the United States and the West done for, human rights and justice and apple pie, whereas Iran is demonized as this backward medieval theocracy. Of course, I don't, that's not, that's what the propaganda says. And yet, and people are starting to recognize that there's just this complete, when I say people, I mean people in the West are starting to believe their own eyes and ears and to break out of the propaganda cage they've been locked into. But it takes something like this, because where it's Yemen, it's Iraq, it's Hizballah, it's Syria, it's Hamas, it's all the most demonized organizations and groups in the world, criminalized, the ones that are criminalized as in all the West, that are trying to stop a literal genocide, a literal Holocaust. And that is just a complete upending of the whole moral system that we've been raised with. And I don't know what to do with that, except to say that people have to keep pressing in everywhere. We're going to get to 1 year. Our next show will be a week from now, October 9th, and we'll be talking more about this 1 year anniversary. But just to say to people, don't stop, don't lose hope. Don't lose hope. I mean, what we see when ordinary people are willing to give everything to liberate their land and their communities is that from oppression that is made in the United States, made in Europe, all the weapons come from there. I think we're gonna take a minute to look at the website, but our colleague David Cronin has a new piece that I think he published just today or yesterday about the ongoing weapons trade with Israel. The European countries that are still buying large quantities of weapons from Israel that are being tested on a genocide. I mean, imagine buying weapons developed by the Nazis at Auschwitz. That's what this is. And this includes, of course, Keir Starmer's Britain. It includes the Netherlands. It includes Spain, which presents itself as critical of Israel and supportive of Palestinian rights, is signing new weapons deals now with Israel. And this genocide, this is where this genocide is being made and financed and fueled.
Yeah, it is. And I mean, what do you say to that? Of course. And there are people, in that photo, for example, in David's piece, people are putting their bodies on the line and literally, tearing these factories, these arms manufacturing factories apart with their bare hands, trying to stop these weapons, not just from being made, but from being sold as commodities by these states. And
yeah. I just want to say one other thing, because I know we're not supposed to respond to trolls and comments, and I generally don't, but I'm on social media a lot, like many of us, because it's part of what we do.
Where we are now.
Communication. But the torrent of dehumanization of Palestinians, of Arabs, of Muslims, the normalization of calling us animals, of calling us things that I can't repeat here because it's a family show. The level of dehumanization that's just normalized, that our lives don't count. We're not human. We can be killed in any number, in any quantity, and it doesn't matter because Israel is great and Israel is fantastic and the West is amazing. And we're all, we all like to do things to goats. That's the thing I'm called maybe 100 times a day. You goat effer. 100 times a day on social media, I'm called that. And other people, and I'm not saying that to say, oh, poor me, because what I'm experiencing is nothing. It's just words. People who know me know that I don't care about those words. But what I'm talking about is the level of dehumanization and normalization that makes this genocide possible. And
and it's not just like the comments on Twitter, which are bad enough, but I'm
just saying that's an indicator. It's an
indicator, but like it's an indicator that goes to the top, because if you look at what is at the media, for example, the selection of the media, all of a sudden they're concerned. I mean, I was watching some of the British media today and yesterday. All of a sudden they're concerned about Iranian missiles being hit at military targets, Israeli military targets. Keir Starmer, the British Prime Minister, called it a barbaric attack, something like that, on Israeli civilians, which is completely untrue. And this is what they're concerned about. Where has this concern been by the media, by the Western politicians for the last year, for the deliberate targeting of Palestinian civilians, of Lebanese civilians, for this genocide that's been going on in Gaza? It's the hypocrisy is outrageous. I mean, hypocrisy is perhaps not the right way to say it, but the standards of this kind of racism and imperialism.
There's so many fronts to fight. And yeah, I mean, that's part of it, right? The dehumanization campaign, so that it makes it more palatable, especially for Western audiences, to participate enthusiastically in this Holocaust. Whether it's by voting for the genocidal war criminals in the White House, no matter who they are, or supporting lawmakers who are bought and sold by these weapons companies. And It's a lot. Let's go to the website again. And we have expanded our features section, actually, because we have so many features that we're publishing every week. Ali, do you want to take us through the newest?
There are so many, but I just want to mention one in particular, which is the one at the top there of the screen. And this is by Tamer Ajrami, who is a Palestinian student from Gaza who lives in Belgium. And he was already in Belgium when this genocide began, but his family is all in Gaza, are all in Gaza. And he wrote a story for us back in May about how his younger brother Ahmed is one of the thousands of disappeared in Gaza, the people who've just gone missing. Nobody knows where they are. Are they in some concentration camp somewhere? Are they under the rubble of a house? And he wrote this, and Ahmed has been missing since I think March. So imagine that. And in this news story, Ahmed talks about how his mother speaks to him from Gaza whenever they can, and she's always begging him, saying, Tamer, you're outside the country, you're outside Gaza, contact international organizations, try to find out anything about Ahmed, and just being unable to do so. And then they saw this photo of Palestinians being used as human shields that was actually published in I think it was in 𝐓𝐡𝐞, if I remember, the Israeli newspaper. And they're like, well, we think that this might be Ahmed, or if this isn't Ahmed, then it could be similar to what happened to him. But just that glimpse of hope from this photo and trying to trace what happened to him. Well, what did the Israelis do to those young men after that photo was taken? Did they survive that? But this story is a particular story of Ahmed Ajrami, but it's also the story of thousands of missing people who often don't get talked about. And this story just really hit me very, very hard. And I'm so grateful to Tamer for sharing it, because what his family is going through, they're going through this while they're living through trying to survive a genocide.
Well, thanks for that. And of course, there's also an incredible amount of analysis by you that you wrote over the weekend after Hasan Nasrallah was assassinated. And also, there we go. Also, that's the news update. Also about.
That's the interview
Lebanon.
I mentioned that was really interesting, fascinating. Elijah Magnia speaking to Rania Khalek on her show on Breakthrough News. And then there's also another piece we published since last week. That's another one I wrote on the day that Hasan Nasrallah was assassinated. But there's another analysis piece by Maureen Murphy, which I really highly recommend. I think it's just there. On the right, it's under mine. It's on the right. No, it's on the right-hand column on the front page. Sorry, we're navigating in real time. Yes, this one. Why massacring civilians is Israel's deliberate strategy. And this is a really good analysis that explains why Israel does what it does in its own perverted logic, of course, its own depraved logic.
Yeah.
But that piece I found really informative as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And as always, please go ahead and subscribe to our email list. That's the best way for us to be in touch. Go up to the top of the EI webpage there and hit the Get Updates link. Ali, do you want to do a short donation pitch?
Well, I just really always want to take the opportunity to thank people, because we have been doing this for a year at this sort of elevated level. We have done so much this past year that we weren't doing before in terms of this live stream. We started it on October 9th last year, and it's grown into an incredible community. And we're so grateful to all the support, the moral support, the information people give us, and just we get ideas from people, and you enable us to do this, and you enable us to do all that reporting and analysis, and to support our writers in Gaza. And we have significantly increased the amount of work we've done since a year ago. And of course, that means we've significantly increased the amount of money we spend to do that work, because any kind of quality work takes that, and we're completely independent. That's why we can say and do the things we say and do, and report the way we do. We tell you the truth the best we can. We give you our views the best. We give you our views openly. They are our views. You may like them, you may hate them, but we give them to you. We can only do that because we're independent. So if you can support us, if you want to, there are links in the description on the YouTube video. Of course, there's a link on the website. And to everyone who has already supported us or is supporting us, I can't say enough how grateful we are. And I haven't said this in a while, but I need to say it. Only support us if you can. I mean financially. We don't want you to give us money if it's going to cause any hardship to you or your family. There's enough people who have extra resources, and we say to them, you chip in so that everyone else can get this information. It's always going to be free for everyone. We're never going to charge for it. We're never going to have a paywall. We're never going to make people pay a subscription. We want this to be free for everyone. And the only way that works is if the people who can support it for the people who can't. And support us in all the other ways that you are doing it, by sharing the information, liking the stream and the videos, sharing the articles with friends and family on social media, and the most important thing, showing up every day for Gaza and for Palestine in every way that you can. Don't let people there be forgotten.
Indeed. Well, thank you so much, Ali. I also want to, of course, thank the brilliant Tamara Nassar behind the scenes. Thanks also to Maureen Claire Murphy for writing and pre-production, and to Ellie Gerzon for post-production and social media. And Michael Brown for doing some very meticulous fact checking, as he always does. Everybody at EI, all the people behind the scenes, and here on the live stream, on behalf of myself, Ali, Jon, Asa, and Tamara, thank you all for joining us, and we'll see you next week.